Recording in progress.
One minute to air. The live stream has started. "30 seconds.
Good afternoon, Durham, North Carolina. Welcome to a special meeting this afternoon on Monday, May 2nd, 2022 at 3 o'clock here in our City Council chambers. Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Mayor O'Neill.
I am present.
Mayor Pro Tem Middleton.
I'm here.
Councilmember Caballero.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
She's here.
She is
and I
here.
think I
saw
hear her coming in.
Councilmember Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Williams.
Present.
Thank you.
I'll let her get seated. All right, we are here this afternoon for a special time here in the Bull City. We will have our interviews of the at-large finalists for the vacancy that was previously held by Councilman Charlie Reese. And at this time, I'd like to introduce you to those finalists and ask them to stand where they are. I see Mr. Nate Baker is already at the podium. We have Dr. Schnequa Nicole Diggs, Dr. Monique Holsey-Hyman. She's actually scheduled to be here at 4:40, so she may not be present for this part, and Dr. Henry C. McKoy, Jr. Thank you all and welcome, and we will go right into our introduction from Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mayor O'Neill. I'm pleased to be here. It's good to see you all. Good to see you, Mayor Pro Tem Middleton, and the rest of you councilors. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be an applicant for this process. Just a quick question, is this the beginning of the 3-minute statement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you all, and I want to give a special thanks to the City Clerk's office, Diana, who's been absolutely incredible throughout this process. I'm really here for 3 reasons. First, because I love Durham. I was born here and raised here. I grew up across from Northgate Mall on a little street called Norton Street. I went through Durham Public Schools, K through 12, so I'm a product of the Durham Public School system. And what I love most about Durham are its people. The people here in Durham are not unfamiliar with adversity and challenges, and we have been for a very long time. But in the face of those challenges like this horrible pandemic, the gun violence, the rapid growth and gentrification, displacement, housing, cost of living, many, many other issues. In the face of all of those challenges, Durham residents show that they care not only about themselves, but they care about each other. The second reason I'm here is because I'm an urban planner with over a decade of experience in long-range community-driven planning across the state and across the South. And I want to bring that experience here to my hometown, to Durham. I've worked with city councils, county commissions, city managers, county managers, all over the state and all over the South to help generate community-driven visions and implement those visions through the tools of local government. And they're powerful tools and tools that I love. I love local government. Tools like the strategic plan, comprehensive plan, tools like budgeting and zoning, and a variety of other tools. And the third reason that I'm here is because I think that my skill set and my passions complement the skill sets and passions of this council. And I think that I can contribute to and round out and complement this council. When I look up at this council, I see many different skill sets in many different areas, whether it's small businesses, whether it's the justice system, faith communities, education, nonprofits, a variety of different areas. And I think that with me on the council that we can round out the council and create an inclusive and vibrant elected body. Thank you.
Mr. Baker, thank you so much. Good afternoon. Before my time starts, Madam Clerk, just a couple of housekeeping matters. Her Honor has asked me to kind of make sure the meeting, as chair of the Procedures Committee, moves along smoothly. So just want to put that on record and welcome all of my colleagues and all who are watching. And let me congratulate you on making it to this cut, and thanking you on behalf of a grateful city for stepping up and stepping out, willing to serve the city in this this high-paying job here on the council. Madam Clerk, you can start the clock. I'll begin my questioning now. Mr. Baker, tell us a little bit about your public engagement in Durham. I know you were born and raised here. What's your public portfolio and resume look like in Durham?
So I've served on the Durham Planning Commission for 4 years. I've been involved formally and informally with a variety of different groups, such as the Environmental Justice Group with the People's Alliance. I've also worked informally, working with Bragtown neighborhood, working with the Walltown neighborhood, working with Merrickmore, and assisting them through the process, which is incredibly complex, of equitable development and trying to achieve equitable development in their neighborhoods and in their communities.
What are the top 3 major challenges facing our city?
Yeah, I think that it would be impossible not to say that the top 2 challenges are the reasons why young people are being taken from us too early, and those are through homicides and gun violence that we're seeing. We've seen a huge spike in gun violence over the past year that's happened in Durham, in North Carolina, and across the United States. The second top reason that we're losing young people is traffic accidents. And I think oftentimes we look at each individual traffic accident as there's a particular cause for that traffic accident. You know, whether it's someone is impaired, whether it's someone is distracted and driving, whether it's a drunk driver. But the reality is that we're a car-dependent city, and our traffic accident rates and the deaths to young people are significantly higher here than they are in our peer cities in Japan and other countries. And so those are the top 2. And the third, I would say, is both a challenge and an opportunity, which is the rapid growth that's occurring in Durham. And I think that that's an area where we can harness that growth for good, but that at the same time, it is a major challenge, and it is resulting in things like gentrification and displacement of our residents. It's resulting in increased costs of living, increased costs of housing, and that it's something that we need to consider and that we need to deal with.
You think that it's within the purview of this council to pass policies to address all of those areas you highlighted as challenges?
Yes. Well, when it comes to gun violence, I think that we're suffering from downstream pollution from upstream polluters, and that is the federal and state government have the ability for guaranteed housing for all, have the ability to provide medical health care to all, have the ability to provide jobs for all, and they're failing to do so. The state and the federal government have the ability to regulate guns in our communities. They're failing to do so, and that results in pain in cities that we see across the United States, including here in Durham. And so we can't pretend like we're not a victim of the lack of governance, lack of good governance that's happening at higher levels of government. So that's an area of difficulty. I do think that we have a lot of power to shape the built environment, shape transportation infrastructure, shape the arrangement of buildings, and how we build our city in order to decrease our reliance on automobiles. That is something that we absolutely can do. And we can manage our growth. We have a lot of tools that are available to us, even with state preemptive powers. There's a lot that we can do to manage our growth and make sure that it is working for our residents and not just against our residents. Sure, there are a lot of things that are working against us. There are a lot of forces that are impossible to overcome and to resist. But there are a lot of things that we can do at the local level when it comes to growth management.
I want to visit back with those lot of things as my time is winding down soon. But I do want to ask you, if you're not selected in this process, and if we can't reach a decision and this matter gets thrown to an election, can you announce here today that you will seek a seat on the council?
Yes, and I have the infrastructure in place to run a good campaign.
All right. Would you cast a vote to defund the Durham Police Department if it came to that?
I have two guiding philosophies when I'm thinking about decision making. One is the ideal and where we should be as a society. And I do believe as a society we can radically alter in the long run what our policing looks like. And the other is, what's the next step? What is the next logical step that we can take? So to defund the police, I'm not sure that I would be in favor of a. There are many different ways of defining what defund the police means, and I think that we can invest in the community safety department, make sure that that there's diversion of people with mental health illnesses outside of the justice system, and that there are non-reformist reforms that we can make to police. But I'm not in favor of defunding the police.
All right. You have touted your expertise as a planner and your expertise in urban planning. Of course, a lot of the decisions we make have to do with land use. And oftentimes folk are frustrated with our decisions. They think that we can do more things, or we ought to do more things as a council. With all of your background and your knowledge and your expertise in this area, you're still going to be one vote on the council. And you've already alluded to some of the roadblocks we face from the state level. So if you were to sit on this council, what policies have we gotten wrong? What votes did we get wrong in terms of land using or zoning, land uses or zoning or annexations? What have we gotten wrong, and what will you help us get right?
Planning isn't just about zoning decisions. It's about a system of planning. It's about engagement. It's about processes. It's about standards that are in place were put in place 5 years ago, and the standards that will result in the changes that happen 5 years from now. We are working within a broken framework, and so each decision we are making is a decision between a not-so-great option and a not-so-great option. We can reform our land use and development and planning systems to make it work so that when we are making decisions, we do have choices of truly good decisions and land development. So what I think we need to do is...
Go ahead and finish your sentence. Go ahead and finish your sentence.
Sure. What I think we need to do is fully rewrite the UDO.
Fully rewrite the UDO. All right. Thank you so much. It's been an honor talking to you.
Thank you.
Congratulations on making it this far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. At this time, Madam Mayor, with your permission, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Caballero for her round of questions.
Good afternoon. Good to be here with you. Thank you for applying. I've literally been where you are. Well, we were upstairs, but I've been where you are. So I know it can be a stressful process. I just have one question for you, and I'm looking it up right now. As council members, we often have to make hard, complex decisions, from zoning to passing our annual city budget to policing. Often these decisions are contrary to our values or what we believed the job would be. How do you plan on squaring that contradiction, and how do you plan on communicating that to supporters who may be disappointed in your decision?
Yeah, communication of these kinds of decisions is really difficult, especially in the face of the lack of local journalism that we have, when journalism is sort of hanging by a thread in this city and in all cities across the country. And that is an important, I think, function of good governance, is an independent body of journalism. And something that I wish that we could address, but I'm not sure if we have the resources. I think it's worth discussing. I believe it is really, really important to bring a variety of different voices into the room in the decision-making process. And what does that look like in real life? When we have major projects, major initiatives, major capital improvement planning, small area planning, which I hope that we can incorporate into our governance structure here in Durham, we need to have steering committees that are made up of diverse voices from a variety of different standpoints. And so that means having developers at the table, it means having neighbors at the table, it means having environmental activists at the table, and many, many others. People who won't agree with one another, but who can find common ground. We need to have a way, a method of managing these processes so that people can talk to one another. I think that we can do more of that in Durham, is bring people who disagree with one another and find common ground, or even realize that we don't have as many disagreements. But you're right, there are decisions that sometimes seem contrary to what you really truly believe in. There are a lot of contradictions in local government because we're working within the context of a neoliberal state and federal system. And that can result in us making decisions that we don't think are truly true to our values. So I would just say that I think that we need a really good system of community engagement. I think that we need to put in place processes of small area planning. And I think that we need to communicate to people that our decisions are not always going to be perfect.
Still have a couple minutes. I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that. I want to follow one of your points around community engagement and creating an ecosystem. What are your opinions or thoughts on our equitable, equitable engagement, our blueprint that we set up in 2018?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great blueprint. I think that the way it's being used oftentimes is about sort of reacting to projects, which is important. We have to have that in place. So if the North Carolina Department of Transportation in Durham, if there's a major infrastructure investment, if there's a developer who has a major project that they want to develop in the city of Durham, we put that practice into place. But we don't have a system. We are the only city of our size in the state of North Carolina that doesn't have a system of small area planning, where we're going out to communities and creating a space where people can imagine the future of their neighborhoods, defining geographic areas where people can come in and imagine the future of their neighborhoods, and then working with them to incorporate those imaginations through the zoning, through capital investments, through specific policies, and through a variety of different changes.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, because I don't consider our Engage Durham strategy a reactive strategy, what is your opinion on that?
Engage Durham is not a reactive strategy. Engage Durham is the process to develop the comprehensive plan, and it is one example, I think, of really, really good and necessary planning, and something that we need to constantly look at when big decisions are being made. And we should be always pointing to the goals and objectives of Engage Durham. Thank you.
That is all.
My thanks to Councilmember Caballero. At this time, we'll yield to Councilmember Freeman for her round of questions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just want to say I thank you for being here today. Thank you for stepping forward in service, and congratulations on getting selected to move forward to this point. I want you to speak specifically to some of the information that you shared in your questionnaire, just noting around your resources that you're using to make your informed decisions beyond the items you listed around the School of Government and the governing magazine, the American Planning Association magazine, and the Institution for Local Self-Reliance. Are there other resources that you use to guide those decision-making? You're kind of building your principles around your decision-making, and then also your resources in the community that you identify to also help in making those decisions.
I think making good decisions on really important issues and impactful issues requires speaking with the people who are going to be most impacted by those decisions. And I think that that's first and foremost the group that needs to be engaged at any given point in time. I also think that getting a variety of information sources, from the local news that we do have out there, reaching out to other communities and speaking with them about their experiences, and working with staff and the staff reports that are put together, and following up with questions and making sure that we fully understand everything that's happening. I think that those are really important places to get information about decisions.
And if you're finished, I'm sorry. Just in a different vein, when you're talking specifically about taking a different approach to planning, I would love to hear more about the system level changes you would love to make.
Yeah, so I think that we can really transform the way that we do planning and land use here in Durham. There are a variety of different things I think that we can do. I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruit items that we can take advantage of, and we've been working on that on the Planning Commission. 4 years ago, we didn't require sidewalks on both sides of the street when there were new subdivisions, and we worked to get that changed. We worked with a variety of groups and you all to make sure that we changed so that we required street trees on all new streets. There are smaller things, low-hanging fruit, such as allowing front porches and to encroach into setbacks. So these are the small items. The big items that I think we need, I think we need a full comprehensive rewrite of our Unified Development Ordinance and a remapping citywide or in targeted areas in the city. And I think that we should also work with the County Commission to do remapping in the county. I think that's really important. In terms of processes themselves, I think that we need a system of the small area planning, corridor planning, neighborhood planning, and we need to have a team that is dedicated to doing that ongoing in all different areas. It's gonna allow us to engage the community. It's also gonna allow us to get a lot of the things done that the people up here want to get done. Incorporating small businesses in the neighborhoods, working to densify our neighborhoods, but in a way that people can get on board with and build ownership over. If we want to densify our city, small area planning is the way to go. And then I also think that we need to have a system of growth management. We need to have people who are dedicated to monitoring what's going on the outskirts of our city. We're growing at one football field every 8 hours. We need to be watching what's going on, tracking it, making sure that we're growing in a sustainable, equitable way. And I think that when we're working with broken regulations right now, you can't blame the decision makers up at the top, because the system itself is broken. The regulations themselves are broken. We can fix those regulations, and we can change the way that we grow here in Durham.
Thank you. That's great. I appreciate those comments. I was trying to take notes because I really would love to implement some of that. I just also just acknowledging a part of what you said around building small corridor plans. I wanted you to take a little bit more time and just say how it is you see economic development working into that, because it's more than just the businesses.
How does economic development work into the small area planning?
Yes.
Yeah, well, a lot of folks want to develop in Durham, want to develop along our corridors, want to invest in Durham. And I think that through things like placemaking, creating walkable streets, by creating centers of activity, by creating small-scale business opportunities in physical space, in physical buildings, and ensuring that there's public space, wide sidewalks, ensuring that people can get there by bikes and other forms of transportation. These all work together collectively. Everything is connected. All of these things work together collectively to enhance quality of life, and quality of life is economic development.
Thank you. That is all that I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. Madam Clerk, I'm going to ask that you would keep a tally of unused time in each question period, in case at the end of each candidate, if we have unused time, if a council member has a follow-up question, something they may have heard or prompted by a candidate, I ask that you would keep a tally of that, please. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. At this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Johnson for her round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you, Mr. Baker, for being here and for your willingness to serve. My first question is, can you tell us a little bit about how you believe social change happens, and in particular, how local government can participate in making change happen?
Can you just clarify a little bit about what you mean by social change?
Yeah, so how So, we are all trying to make the world a better place. What is the role of local government in that work? In that work to improve our community, to improve folks' lives?
Yeah. Well, I guess from a legal standpoint, this sort of a federalist system, there are certain powers that we have in local government that don't exist at the state level, although our powers are delegated by the state. And we have very unique powers that do not exist at the federal level. So I think that we need to use those powers, leverage those powers for the community good. And I think, not to be a one-trick pony, but to come back to the small area planning, I think that small area planning is community organizing, but it is community organizing with the appendage of local government, connected to the powers and finance and the ability to buy and sell land, for example, of the local government and the ability to do those things. Zoning is really important, and it is the regulation of real estate, one of the most powerful industries in the world. We have a budget of general fund of $270-something million, but we regulate over $60 billion of real estate just in this city, in the city of Durham, and so it's an incredibly huge power. It's a power that even at the federal government level does not exist, and you'll oftentimes hear Congresspeople lament the fact that they can't reform land use, but we can at the local level. I think that, coming back to your question about social change, I think we need to empower residents so that they feel like they can have control over the world around them. There's a famous French theorist named Henri Lefebvre who speaks a lot about what's called the right to the city. The right to the city is incorporated in the Mexican Constitution and the Brazilian Constitution. It's this idea that we should have the right to live in our city, to shape our city. And so I think that that's kind of what it means for local government to enact social change.
Thank you. So on the Planning Commission, I'm sure you are well aware of the fact that in quite a few cases, the engagement that developers do with communities lead to changes that are not necessarily what we would think the city wants or needs. How do you avoid small area planning and community engagement around the zoning process becoming just a tool for homeowners to prevent increasing density in their communities?
Yeah, this is not the same thing as the CACs in Raleigh. This is not the same thing as NPOs. This is not the same thing as what we call engagement when developers go out and kind of check a box with residents and residents oppose. When we go out to communities and we say, and a developer goes out to a community, corporate developer goes out to a community and says, we got 230 homes that are going right next to you. The first thing someone is going to do is they're going to be defensive, and they're going to react, and they're going to say, no, this is happening too fast. No. The purpose of small area planning is to engage people long before that happens, to engage proactively with people. And that way people have the ability to imagine, and they're not afraid of density. They're not as afraid of change. Look, there's nothing perfect here. It can be done well, it can be done poorly, but when it's done well, it is a transformative way of ensuring that we have better growth and more equitable growth. When we put the regulations in place beforehand, also, we don't have quite as much of a need for developers to come in and suddenly propose something drastically different. If we do small area planning, let's say in Bragtown, and they say, okay, here's what we want the growth on the outskirts of Bragtown to look like. We want it to be dense and walkable and mixed use. We want parks. We want social services and other things incorporated in the fabric of our neighborhood, and we want it to be walkable, just kind of like the Hayti district. When we do that, when then we put the regulations in place to actually allow that to happen, we have this power. It is delegated to us by the state of North Carolina. We do have this power. We can facilitate the process when the developer is ready to come in, is ready to develop. We can facilitate that process and make it a much more predictable process for the developer. A lot of developers, as much as they love to make profit, what they love more is to manage risk. And if we can help manage risk in a way that is good for the community, I believe that we can truly change our system of planning here in Durham.
Thank you. New question. Who do you see as your base, and what are the most important values of the people in that community that you would bring with you in your role as a council member?
Yeah, I think that I have over the past 4 years on the Planning Commission, I've been laser focused on planning. Frankly, I saw this as a pretty big hole when I came in. I care about a lot of different issues, I really do. But the thing about planning and zoning is that it creates strange bedfellows, and I think that you can find a diversity of viewpoints, a diversity of ideologies of people who are really interested in getting engaged in the planning process. So to answer what is my base, I'm not really sure who my base is. I consider myself ideologically left of center, and I believe that those people tend to be my base, but I'm also able to reach out to people who are very, very different. The work that I do on a daily basis is in the South. It's in small towns. And what I've found is that small towns and people in these towns are actually on board and in favor with pretty progressive stuff when it comes to planning and zoning issues. As long as we don't bring up Fox News or other things like that, we can get a lot of different kinds of people on board with these kinds of issues.
Thank you. You won't have enough time to fully answer this question, but last one, what is your vision for the future of our community safety work through the Community Safety Department and other alternatives to policing in Durham?
I am 100%, 110% behind the Community Safety Department. I have a lot of respect for Ryan and the work that he's doing over there. I think the roundtables, the discussions, all of the work that they're doing, the research that they're conducting, the accountability that they hold in looking at what's happening in the jails and looking at what's happening in the police department, and the communication that they're providing to the council is all invaluable. I do believe in alternatives to policing. I do believe that we can find other ways of making our community safer without putting people with guns on the street. So I'm in favor of the Community Safety Department.
Thank you so much. That's all I have. I'll turn it back over to Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Johnson. At this time, I'll yield to Councilmember Williams for his round of questions.
Good day, good day.
Hey, hey.
You. It's great to see you in here, and I want to sort of shape this exchange as really important, really aggressive, and in a sense, a devil's advocate, because I sort of did my homework on each one of you all, and I want to ask some specific questions, and I want to ask, based on your background and your experience and engagement, and then I want to ask some general questions. So nothing to be taken personally. I just want to be able to have a good, rich debate or conversation here. So how do you define an economically strong Durham?
I guess from a philosophical standpoint, I think that everyone should have a job, everyone should feel stable, everyone should feel safe when they're out in their community. Economic development is not the same thing as economic growth. Economic development is a lot about quality of life. Those two things, especially at the local level, are intertwined and interlinked. I think that ensuring that we're reducing gun violence, ensuring that we're reducing vehicular accidents and the impacts that those have on people in Durham. I think reaching carbon neutrality by the year 2045 and being responsible in that way to the environment and to the climate is all important. And I think that those are all connected to a strong, vibrant economy at the local level.
Gotcha. So as a small business owner, speak directly to me. What does that mean, or how do you translate that to someone that is practically in the everyday, day-to-day transactional work? Not idealistically, but how does that relate to the person who doesn't have time to, even think or consider the big picture?
It's about good governance. It's about making sure that when they go to City Hall to get a permit, it works for them. It's about being good when it comes to customer service and making sure that things run smoothly, making sure that when small business wants to come here, that they have space. When a larger business wants to come here, that industrial, for example, or they're searching for flex industrial space in some area, that they can go there, and so that we have a variety of different jobs for people.
Thank you. I want to touch on a question that I believe has been asked twice, but more specifically, So we just got a lot of money from the COVID era that we're still in. And if you were on council and had to determine the format in which we disperse this money, what would be your values? How would you lay that out?
Yeah, that's a really challenging question. It is a lot of money, and it is a huge responsibility. And I do think that we need to be very careful and very systematic about the way that it's used, very transparent about where it goes, and how that money works toward achieving the goals of the community. So I do think that we should be able to tie the spending of that money to Engage Durham, coming back to Councilwoman Caballero talking about Engage Durham. Those are goals and objectives of and by the community. This is money for the community. And I think that in order to achieve the goals of the community, we need to be very careful and monitor and track, have an implementation and tracking system to make sure that we're spending those funds wisely.
Good, gotcha. Something more specific to your engagement. You actually, in regards, because you're in the planning commission, so you deal a lot with developers. You have some friends and you have some frenemies. Mm-hmm. One thing I hear a lot is we spend a lot of money trying to build in Durham, and most of us just say, forget it, we don't want to deal with it. And your name tends to come up. So if you had to forge a more positive relationship with these folks that are building all of these structures in Durham, what would that ideal relationship in a more positive way look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of really great conversations with developers, large and small. I would say I probably have a better relationship with the smaller developers, but I've had some great conversation with large developers about how we can improve things here in Durham. And I think, coming back to some of the themes that we've talked about earlier, I think that there are some lose-lose situations that we're finding, and we have opportunities for win-win situations. And part of that is by rewriting the UDO. It's not just putting in place those standards that ensure that we have a good end product when it comes to what's actually physical and built on the ground, but it's also the process of building that. I think that we can streamline a lot of procedures. I think if we have small area planning, we can make it a much more predictable process, predictable for developers, but also predictable for residents, so that they aren't, afraid of something that's going to happen. But yeah, this comes back to managing risk. It's not all about profit. It's also about managing risk. And the way that we help developers manage risk is by putting in place a very sturdy, a very predictable process, and streamline and cut some of the fat out of that process. And I've talked with a lot of developers about a lot of different ideas. And one of the reasons why the large developers, and I think we need to kind of treat these two things a little bit differently. The large developers that are working on the outskirts, the Pulte groups, third largest home builder in the country who's coming in and asking for rezonings in a lot of the outskirts of our city. They follow the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance right now is a not very sustainable building product. I've talked with them. They are open to changing. They are open to dedicating parks, public parks for people, for the community good in their developments. They're open to a variety of housing types, but they're not going to do it unless we make them do it, and we can make them do it. But if we tie that together with a more predictable process and reduce their costs in the discretionary review and development review processes, then we can find a win-win, I think, for the community and for both developers, who are the engines of growth. The city is not the engine of growth. The city shapes the growth. I think that we can find opportunities there. For infill, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I just want us to.
Okay, yeah. One other thing, for infill development, we can, I think that there are a lot of different strategies that we can use to make sure that the procedures are much easier for small-scale developers in town with better development outcomes.
Got you. And I hear these words a lot. I hear equity, I hear walkability, I hear connectivity. One thing that I learned when I was actually running was when I went to every single voting poll, this city is so diverse. And it is so idealistic in many ways, many different ways. And when we utilize those words, not everyone lives by those. So how do we create that same culture of connecting communities and walkability to the folks who live about 10 miles out. The city is big within the county. Sometimes we tend to leave those folks out. I'm not riding a bike from Eno to Center City. So how do we make sure we're including all of Durham in those ideals?
Yeah, well, we can do it by directly engaging them through the small area planning process. That's one way. But I also think that those folks they're intended to engage in the community-wide community engagement processes like Engage Durham. They can participate in that. But I think that they need to see that the outcomes of more walkable, equitable, sustainable, multimodal development is better than exclusionary development with the single housing type here and a different housing type there and different people isolated from one another, and you got to get in your car, and that's the only way that people can get around. I think that when I go from community to community, I know I only got 12 seconds. When I go from community to community, I always ask the same question. How do you get around now, and how do you wish you were able to get around?
Thank you.
Overwhelmingly, no matter where, people say they wish they could get around using a variety of modes of transportation, and they're not able to.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baker. You're one of the smartest people I know, and I appreciate you being here, and thanks for all your support in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Williams. At this time, Her Honor the Mayor, if she has questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem, and I appreciate you presiding this afternoon. Mr. Baker, I'm going to be very brief in my questions. I'm so glad that you all are here today and we get to talk with you all. I just have one simple question followed with and it's a two-part question. One is, what is your vision for Durham in the next 2 years? And then how will you work with your council to buy into that vision and move us forward together in achieving that vision?
I want the people of Durham to feel ownership over the way that we grow. And that's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen immediately. It's a slow process to build that kind of trust and to build that kind of faith with the Durham community. But I want people to feel like when they engage in the process that they're not only listened to, but that their ideas are incorporated into policymaking and into the physical growth of our city. That's really important to me. For how we actually get there, I would just point to my experience on the Planning Commission. I think that I have worked slowly over time to build a lot of trust on the Planning Commission. We have changed the way that we talk about things on the Planning Commission. I cannot take credit for that. But I do think that I worked really hard to create buy-in and to build friendships, even with people who I disagree with. And if you watch a Planning Commission meeting, you can see that there is a lot of respect between one another. Even if we disagree on certain issues, we oftentimes find common ground on things. And that's the kind of leadership and the kind of experience that I think that I can bring here to the City Council.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Baker. I think that completes our round of questions for you. Madam Clerk, do we have any minutes in the bank?
Yes, sir. We've got 9 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay. Colleagues, I have a 9 minutes. If any of you have any round robin shotgun follow-up questions for Mr. Baker, we'll exhaust those 9 minutes. And I'll very quickly, I'll start since I led off this particular round. First, Mr. Baker, you refer to small area planning almost as if we don't do it. And some of our previous colleagues take issue with that, actually, who have sat on this council. For example, the 9th Street Compact Design District is considered a result of small area planning. So I guess my question is, from a factual point of view, why do you seem to advocate for something for us to start doing that we seem we're doing? And secondly, some of us think the Constitution should be written over, given its history in our country, but some advocate it's a living document. Our UDO is constantly amended and revisited. So when you say rewrite the UDO, what animating principle would you start with, again, that this government isn't doing now? Take about a minute to answer that, and then I'll yield to my colleague.
Sure. Yeah, so small area planning is more than just looking at the land use, which is what a lot of the compact design districts are, which is it's a sort of a rezoning process. And the compact design districts can oftentimes be sort of a result of a small area planning process, of an adopted small area plan, which has and addresses more than just land use. It addresses, from a comprehensive standpoint, capital investments, programs, and a variety of other topics related to growth in those areas. So it's not just about land development and regulations. So we do make amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance from time to time. A comprehensive rewrite is pretty typical every 20 years in communities. Chapel Hill is rewriting theirs right now. Raleigh rewrote theirs a few years ago. Wake Forest is rewriting theirs now. It's very common, but it is a way of, we kind of create a patchwork over time. And that's just how everything works when we amend them from time to time. And this is a way of, one, looking at our procedures. Sometimes there are overlapping procedures. I think someone here mentioned it themselves, that developers find the process to be cumbersome. And some of that has to do with opportunities for streamlining the process and making it more efficient in a way that is true to Durham's values. But also there are missing items in the Unified Development Ordinance that I think can be incorporated. For example, we don't have any general design standard. Getting into the details here, we don't have any general design standards. I think we're missing a variety of different kinds of zoning districts, and we're lacking the tools that we really need to be able to make good decisions about growth. So yeah, I think UDO rewrite, comprehensive, sort of top to bottom, is going to be something that helps this council achieve what it really wants to achieve.
Colleagues, anyone want to seek recognition for? I'll start with you, Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to follow up, and I will say that I do take issue with the small area planning comment, just so we're clear. Not only was the compact design for the land use, but it also did include economic development, and there was a lot of conversation. Anyway, otherwise, if you could, and I hesitate to ask the question, but I did have a chance to look at your voting record, and I do want to say that it's a pretty amazing thing to see folks who have lived in the city for so long vote every single year. And so I do want to just take a moment and say, if you could speak to how you understand the way that the civic engagement involved in understanding who runs our city actually connects to how these things kind of evolve, that would be helpful.
I'm sorry, can you clarify the question?
So essentially, being involved at the municipal level in voting every single year, who sits in these seats? All 7 of us, all 6 of us at this point, but at some point there'll be 7, how that impacts how we move forward in our city.
Yeah, I have voted in every single election that I've lived in Durham, and really since I turned 18 and was voting absentee as a college student, and I've really cared about who does sit up here and makes these kinds of decisions at the municipal level. I think that who sits up here, people care about a lot of different issues, and they come to the table with oftentimes, expertise and passions in certain areas. I think a lot of us would believe that. And so I have, been very interested and very supportive of people who share those different passions in each of those different areas. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Williams, I think you sought recognition.
Thank you. I had a question about, just real quick. I'll type this one out, so I'll just read it. So Durham's labor participation right now is 59.7%, and 4 in 10 working age citizens have withdrawn from the labor market. The local economy consists largely of jobs that require a bachelor's or graduate degree, and it's moving further in that direction. Meanwhile, our high school dropout rate is 17%. Small businesses who are hiring service workers are struggling to find employees. While crime in the city is growing fast, what policies would you support to try and change this trajectory that's creating this tale of two cities? And in other words, there are 26,000 job vacancies in this city, pretty much, and we don't talk about it enough. So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that's a major challenge, and one that the City Council has some influence over, as well as many other jurisdictions, and working collaboratively with partners, both overlapping partners, adjacent partners, higher level partners, is going to be pretty critical to a really good economic development program. Obviously, training is incredibly important in making sure that people are trained, and particularly if they're trained for free. And if the employer can provide that training for free, that's going to be a huge benefit. And making sure that we're having conversations with our county counterparts and investing in community college and other forms of job training there. And then incubation and ensuring that we're incubating small businesses. Look, small businesses are good because they are homegrown and they develop deep roots here in the community, and so I think that's going to have to be a driver of our approach here. And I also want to and I think in accordance with the interests of other people on the council, explore the Cleveland model and a variety of other systems of economic development when it comes to worker-owned businesses and cooperatives and those kinds of things, partnering with other institutions and creating an ecosystem that is friendly to worker ownership. So I think that we need to attract, incubate, retain small businesses and people who have deep roots here in the Durham community.
Mr. Baker, thank you so much for running the gauntlet today, sir. You are certainly free to remain in the chamber if you like, and listen to your other fellow candidates. If not, you're excused from the podium. And again, with the thanks of this council and the city, best wishes to you, and
thank you very much.
Forward to having further conversations.
I also just lastly want to say, because I forgot to say it, that I'm very humbled to be a part of the four applicants, the four finalists, and I have a lot of respect for the other three. So I'm looking forward to seeing them.
We appreciate that. Congratulations to you. All right, colleagues, our next candidate at this time is Dr. Schnequa Nicole Diggs, who I believe is approaching the podium. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ma'am. We're going to start with your 3-minute introductory statement, and then we will begin our rounds of questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, City Council members, press, concerned citizens that are both present and online, for this opportunity to address you all this afternoon. Like was just said, my name is Dr. Schnequa Nicole Diggs. I am a 5th-year, tenure-track assistant professor of public administration at North Carolina Central University. As a military brat, you learn very quickly to adapt. I have lived in several cities across the country, but Durham is where I call home. I moved here in 1999 to attend Central and fell in love with the community, although it didn't offer the vibrancy that we see today. Shortly after graduation, I started to notice changes in downtown Durham and was very curious to understand how cities transform into communities where people come to live, work, and play. I took this curiosity back to school in Virginia and then in Florida and learned about the theory and practice of public administration and urban planning. I have experience working with community members on neighborhood assessment plans, urban revitalization projects, comprehensive plans, and I've also helped people save their homes through foreclosure prevention programs. I currently serve on several professional executive boards, and my policy-related research examines social equity and the impacts that administrative actions have on perpetuating inequities in historically marginalized communities. I'm a social justice advocate with a goal of crafting effective policies that reduce generational inequities. My research also focuses on issues of gender equity, intersectionality, diversity, and inclusion in public workspaces. Since returning to Durham, I have purchased a home, became a landlord, and worked closely with the PB Project the Affordable Housing Implementation Committee, and the Coalition for Housing in Transit, I have built positive relationships with fellow citizens and worked collaboratively to better engage marginalized citizens in civic activities and devise strategic ways to address housing and transit needs of our community currently faces. As Durham has transformed throughout the years, I have observed from afar, but all roads have led me back home. I want to serve on City Council to work towards achieving Strategic Goal 3, connected, engaged, and diverse communities, with the goal of strengthening the foundation, enhancing values, and improving the quality and sustainability of neighborhoods. Aside from my education and experiences, my ideals of collaborative approach to governance, my drive to preserve livable, inclusive, and a prosperous city for all, and my ability to think critically and compassionately about issues is why I think I'm the best candidate for this position.
Dr. Diggs, thank you so much, and again, welcome. We appreciate your opening statement. At this time, we're going to begin the first round of questioning by Councilmember Caballero, and I'll yield to her.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good afternoon, Dr. Diggs. Thank you for joining us. Just real quick, it's going to be the same question as the previous candidate or applicant. As council members, we often make hard, complex decisions, from zoning to passing our annual city budget to how we're going to do policing. Often these decisions are contrary to our values or what we believe the job would be or will be. How do you plan on squaring that contradiction, and how do you plan on communicating that to supporters who may be disappointed by your decision?
I understand with taking this position, I have the responsibility of being accountable to citizens. I believe that they need to sit at the core of all decisions. We need to consult them to see their ideals and to make sure that they're included on all the decisions that are made with City Council. I answered part of the question. Oh, when there's conflict? You want me to read the second? Yes.
Mic is off. So how do you plan on squaring the contradiction? How do you plan on communicating that to supporters if they're disappointed in your decision?
Just being really transparent with the inner workings of local government. I think a lot of citizens aren't aware of the ins and outs. I can admit that I am still learning the ins and outs of local government, but making sure that you keep those lines of communications there, making sure that you're transparent in your decisions, and making sure that you have an ethical foundation in the decisions that you're making.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Caballero, and at this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Freeman for her questions.
Thank you. Again, asking a similar question that I asked the previous candidate around the resources that you direct or that you use in making your decisions. How would you, I guess, additionally add resources? And I'm trying to note the ones that you included in your questionnaire. So just give me a second. I will say them all.
Madam Clerk, would you see to the clock, please? It's just showing 17 seconds stuck in. Thank you.
My apologies. Would have probably been better to just print, but, you know, technology. I think I may be confusing your application with someone else's because I don't see a response around that.
Okay, so can you repeat the question again?
The resources you use in making decisions.
Oh, the resources I use in making decisions. I lean on my experiences. I lean on my education. I also lean in on the expertise of individuals in which I'm making the decision with and making the decision for.
Thank you. And then just additionally, I guess, leaning in, acknowledging how much we do around planning and zoning, if you could share a little bit of your background around that.
Okay. So when I decided to go back to school in Old Dominion, learn the principles of community development and planning, learned a little bit about zoning, learned about the historical racism that happens within our zoning plans, and how neighborhoods are created, the process of neighborhood change. And within it's very disheartening to see how when you talk about redevelopment, when you talk about planning, when you talk about zoning, you see a clear line between those who benefit from those changes and those who are in the detriment of those changes. And you see it time and time again. One of my priorities, if I am selected, is to ensure that those who are on the side of not benefiting from the change, that it doesn't stick with the same marginalized communities, that both sides of Durham experience some kind of losses and some kind of gains.
Thank you. And I really struggle with whether or not to bring this up again. So just acknowledging, I did get a chance to look at your voting record, and there was showing a lot missing. And I really was leaning in thinking I couldn't not support, because I knew that your name may be a factor in that. And so I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of expand on it.
So the first few years after graduation, I was still registered to vote in Virginia. My first time voting in North Carolina was actually Thursday. Initially, going through school, I didn't see the value of voting. I didn't understand local politics. I didn't understand how local government functioned. And I can even admit I wasn't really concerned with that part because I was a business major. I just thought, find a job, be able to pay my rent, do those things. But as I've gotten exposure and I see the role that City Council has in the livelihood of its constituents, it really probed me to get more engaged, more active. I have voted in Virginia, Florida, California, all the different places that I've lived, and it is a very rewarding experience. And I think the main reason or the main decision why I decided to start voting is because I saw representation. My first time voting was for former President Barack Obama, and to see a Black man be courageous enough to step into that position or to have the courage to step into that position, I felt like it was my civic duty to go and vote. And I will be honest, my hand was shaking the entire time, but just to be a part of that change that we'd like to see.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. At this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Johnson for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you, Dr. Diggs, for being here and for your willingness to serve. I also moved to Durham in '99 to go to school, so we've been on the same track for a little bit. So my first question is, what do you believe should be the role of local government in creating positive social change in the community?
When you asked this question earlier, it made me think. I know my desires within myself, and something that I am excited about in my career is that I inspire change for my students. I look for ways to be intentional and impactful. I look for ways to plant that seed in our future public leaders. And I think the same goes for each one of you all sitting in the council, that you have this desire to see some kind of change happen within your community. I think it's important to get different people at the table. So just looking at the PB process and getting high schoolers involved, getting college students involved, those are our change agents. So it's important to get them engaged early on to see the the inner workings of local government, because that's where you can see that tangible, sustainable type of change within our communities.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your vision for the future of our community safety work here in Durham and the development of alternatives to policing?
I think it's phenomenal, the ideas that each one of you have, and that the expertise and the excitement that Durham residents have. The alternatives to policing or alternatives to safe communities. It made me really think about white coat syndrome and how you have this different approach when your physician comes in the room that can escalate a situation. I think the same thing when we talk about policing. If you're riding in the car and a police officer comes behind you, you immediately, not for everyone, but for some, you immediately tense up and you think that you're doing something wrong. So I think providing those alternatives can de-escalate situations and really think about why the police are being called to these communities or these incidents. Sometimes you might need a social worker, you might need a mental health specialist. There are other ways to keep individuals safe in their community. So I love the idea of exploring different alternatives to policing.
Thank you. Could you tell me what would be your first policy priority if appointed to the council, and how would you pursue its adoption?
First priority. I am very concerned and enthusiastic about the opportunities to address affordable housing, and that looking at the availability of housing options, looking at the quality, making sure that there's some kind of standard that happens with housing, making sure that we ensure those protections. So rental support, the eviction moratorium, those types of things are the things that really motivated me to apply for this position. I currently serve on a couple boards that look in those areas, and I think we need that representation on city council to fight for those issues. Even think about accessibility and the issues of transit, or the opportunities of transit. I won't say issues, the opportunities for transit and the connectivity for different communities.
Thank you. Is there anything specific on either affordable housing or transit that you think that we should be doing as a city that we're not doing right now?
I think I think it's important to think about this idea of pacing ourselves with the growth. There is a lot of new interests that are coming into the city, and it's looking like the affordability here is not granted to everyone. So everyone doesn't have the same opportunities to experience this new side of Durham, or this new vibrancy that is occurring in Durham. So I think it's very important for us to think about the pacing, think about regulations that we can have on developers that are interested in coming here, and ensuring that in their development plans that they are designating housing options for individuals who are at the 80% of AMI or 60% of AMI or even 30% or below of AMI.
Thank you. So last question, who do you see as your base, and what are the most important values of the people in that community that you would bring with you to your service on the council?
I think my base would be anyone who's concerned with affordable housing. I can't pinpoint specific individuals. I know I have spoken to community leaders in Braggstown and some of the concerns that they have about affordability, some of the concerns they have about transit. I would also lean to the expertise of the members of the Coalition for Housing and Transit, because they do a lot of great work getting the word out and coming together and strategizing on ways to address housing and transit in Durham.
Thank you so much.
And also students. I'm a big advocate for getting students involved as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to kick it back to Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. At this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Williams for his questions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Dr. Diggs, it's great to have you here today. And again, I want to have a really nice, rich conversation, nothing taken personal. And I say that because there are a lot of supporters of you all. How do you define an economically strong Durham?
Access. Access to opportunities for employment, access to quality housing. And when we think about access, it's making sure that you have proper training, you have proper opportunities to access the economic prosperity that our city is currently facing.
Define access.
We'll say education. Think of different ways to train, so workforce development, seeing what kind of industries are interested in coming to Durham. So specifically looking at the idea of smart cities, the idea of low emission, these smart cars, or what are they called? Electric vehicles. I think that presents a great opportunity for the city of Durham to think about workforce development. What things are needed to support those industries, and making sure that we have the training for those individuals who are currently looking for work, looking to change their jobs, and making sure that they're trained to take those positions. Because if you think about it, as new industries move into the triangle, this gap, our wealth gap, will widen because of the different qualifications, education experiences that you'll need. So it's important in order to address the gap and the widening of that gap, is to make sure that you have those training.
Thank you. I am on a mission to stop everybody from saying affordable housing and leaving it at that. So, how do we make housing more affordable?
I would address that by saying providing subsidies. I think affordability, loosely defined, is when you think about different industries that are here. I know a lot of people have seen a lot of growth in their equity. There's a lot of interest in raising the prices for apartments, those types of things. So if you see the gap between what your minimum wage or what the average person is making on a day-to-day basis, that affordability becomes a challenge. So providing subsidies, providing rental assistance, providing down payment assistance. There's not a lot of talk about home ownership like it was when I left in 2008. So having those conversations, because that's how you generate generational wealth.
So we have about 26,000 job vacancies in the city. And we have a lot of jobs. Apple is bringing 14,000. We have thousands of jobs that are coming that are very high wage. Many of them require a graduate or master's degree, undergrad degree. Like, how do we leverage this growth that's happening in Durham and the Triangle also?
Leverage it in terms of?
So we're experiencing growth. Mm-hmm. We're either going to leverage this growth or we're going to be victims of the growth.
Yeah. But that's thinking, doing research on, you said there were how many jobs available?
Over 20,000, close to.
You think about, why are there 20,000 jobs that are still vacant? There has to be some research that's done to see where there's some kind of disconnect, whether it is education. And maybe we need to think about education policies or making higher ed more affordable, where you don't have to take out student loans that you're paying on for the next 50 years. The new industries that are relocating here, they require a certain level of education. They are going to require, they're going to have interest coming into the city. So there's opportunities to find ways. You're going to need transportation. So that can create more jobs for individuals that don't have the same kind of education levels. And that's our way to kind of leverage that.
Awesome, thank you. So like I said earlier, I did a little homework and I've been stalking you all. So specifically to you, just to anybody, what top 3 most important areas where Durham's government needs to improve, and why are they important to you, and how would you improve them?
The 3 ways? I
I'm
think
not hung up on 3. You can just
okay.
give it some constructive criticism.
I know a challenge that the city has faced for some years is to keep Durham residents engaged. I think having this equitable community engagement platform is a step in the right direction because it keeps citizens at the center of the conversation, of the discussion, and all engagement processes. It's asking the right questions to see who currently participates, where there's room for individuals that aren't represented to participate, and also talks about the sustainability of that participation. I think the issue of affordable housing, which is something I'm passionate about, is not specific to the city of Durham. There are cities all around that are experiencing this. But I do think that collectively we can come with strategies to address that affordability, to address issues of transit, transportation, multi-modes of getting to and from in and out the city. I think there's also opportunities to think about smart growth ways on how to make sure that there's mixed use, that we use our land in the most effective way on preserving the natural beauty that comes with Durham.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask 2 questions into one here since we're low on time. So Durham just got a whole bunch of money from COVID. Describe your values and how you would conceptualize dispersing that money, and tell me how small businesses factor in that.
Okay. Thinking about it, I would say, again, back on affordable housing, finding ways to subsidize the increased costs to make sure that residents are able to stay in their homes, whether they own them, whether they are renting. I think for small businesses, they were really hit very hard with COVID. I think it's important to put some of those resources and support our small, local, minority-owned, women-owned businesses. And with those resources, offset some of the losses that happened because of COVID. Also take the opportunity to grant money to help with marketing, help with exposure. There could be different campaigns that could be used to make sure that we're patronizing our local businesses. Making sure that the pace of new businesses come in do not overwhelm or overshadow the existing businesses that are here and those that are to come.
Thank you so much. Really appreciative that you're here, and congrats on making it to the Final Four.
Thank you.
Looking forward to chatting a little more if we get a little extra time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Williams, and I'll yield to myself now. And Dr. Diggins, again, let me welcome you and congratulate you on making the cut, and thank you for stepping forward and your willingness to serve the people of our great city. When did you get back in Durham? I know you got here in 1999, left 2008. How long have you been back?
This might be the most challenging question. So officially, between 2018 and 2019,
Okay.
I was still in California and flying back and forth to work at Central.
So you're not flying anymore.
No.
How long?
So since 2019.
2019. Your credentials and exploits in the academy are unimpeachable and are significant. But we of course are a local governing body, and one of the ways that we demonstrate vestedness here to our local residents is how vested we are locally, voting and things of that nature. And you already spoke about your journey towards voting. So given that, what does your public engagement, what do we say to folk in the city to illustrate your sense of vestedness in local politics here in Durham? with full consideration and respect to your enormous exploits and successes in the academy?
It's really looking at the local impact. This was, full transparency, not my desire to stand up here. It was something that I fought very hard, but I believe in being obedient. And seeing the position open, hearing about the former councilman stepping down, when you hear things over and over again, it's something that's placed inside of you. And over the past 2 years, and specifically over the last 6 months, I've really been thinking about how to be intentional and how to be impactful and expanding that outside of my academic realm. So when this position came up and I tried to fight it, it's the thing I've been thinking about on how I can make those changes. How can I lead by example? It is clear I have not voted in Durham before. I'm getting inactive and I'm leaning into opportunities that are happening. I step up to support different initiatives with the PB project. I step up to participate in different community groups. I step up and participate, and I just throw my name in the hat, and I try to do the best that I can in those positions. And for me, it's important, like I said, to lead by example. So if I have students who are following the same trajectory that I have, that I'm encouraging them just by standing here right now to participate, to consider one day sitting on one of these seats, because it's not something that I ever considered. So I'm just enamored by this opportunity to stand here right now.
We're glad you're here. When you say obedience, is that a faith reference? Or
It is. It is.
Okay. All right. If you're not selected, and if by chance we don't fill this seat because we reach an impasse as a council and this gets thrown to an election, are you willing to announce now that you're going to run for election for the seat?
Absolutely.
Okay.
This has been a rewarding experience up until this point, and as I've told individuals in my network, they're excited about the opportunity, and if it comes to a point where I have to run, I have full support from my network, and that's just something that gives you a little extra oomph to just keep going.
If you don't get this selected and we do choose someone, will you run during the next electoral cycle for the council?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. What are you willing to raise taxes for?
What am I willing to raise taxes for? I know one of the big initiatives that I've been hearing is policing. And I do not have any expertise in policing at all. But there is this conversation, and I know you asked the candidate before me about defunding the police. I do believe if we did have to raise taxes, I think it should go to policing, to make sure that our communities are safe, to make sure that our officers are properly trained, and have continuous training to ensure that they are acting with integrity and acting ethically to protect and serve our community.
What are the top, in your assessment, what are the top 3 challenges facing our municipality?
Policing. Another challenge I would say is the continuation of the relationship between administrators and the citizens. The other challenge I would see is keeping up with the pace of the new interests that is coming to Durham.
Did you say a relationship between administrators and citizens?
Mm-hmm. Administrators and citizens.
Say a little bit more about what's the issue there?
You just think about the history of Durham and some of the decisions that have played, specifically thinking about hate time and construction of 147, how that has led to, trauma, real life trauma that is it looks as if history is repeating itself with gentrification and the new investment that's coming into the city. So I think it's important to genuinely ask people to sit at the table and get their opinions on what they see for their city in the next 3 to 5 years. Gentrification is not anything that we can stop per se, but if we have the right voices or representatives of the voices of the community, that can help us move in a strategic way, in a way that is more collaborative on making those changes. So it's really mending some of the past harms that have come from administrative decisions that were rooted in all kinds of different inequities that have left a lasting impact on communities of color.
Thank you for that. Finally, there are many, many matters, diverse matters that come before the council. What area would your expertise and background deepen our inquiry and level of expertise? Like for me, they look to me for snacks and leadership on snacks and things like that. What would be your area of expertise that would deepen our level of inquiry and expertise as a council?
Absolutely, it would be housing equity. I would also say gender equity, the issues with barriers of being considered full citizens or having access to government affairs. Inclusion, I would typically say inclusion and diversity, but looking at this panel right here, it's a symbol of, we're doing a really good job in local government on making sure that we have diversity, not only in terms of our race and ethnicity, but also in the different ages, the different perspectives, the different backgrounds, the different specializations or specialty areas. I think I can add,
Finish your statement.
people always talk about a fresh approach, but a different approach that's not afraid to ask questions of why we do things and challenge our thinking to make sure that we're not making decisions just based on what the policy is. We think about who is truly being affected from this and not think in terms of our term in office, but in the long range.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diggs. It's been an honor speaking to you. I'll yield to the mayor.
Good afternoon, Dr. Diggs. So glad that you're here today. I have the same question. It's sort of an aspirational question, and that is, what is your vision for Durham over the next 2 years, and how would you help the council to pretty much grab hold to that vision and move towards it in a collaborative fashion?
When you asked that before, I thought in 2 years, and that's very ambitious. But my vision for the next 2 years is to, one, get people who haven't really been engaged more engaged in city operations. The next part of my vision is to think strategically about how we approach housing. And again, like I've said previously, about the new investment that is coming into the city. My vision is also to think about some of the other long-term effects that have happened behind COVID. I know we talk about housing, we talk about small businesses, but just really thinking about what that has mentally done for us, our sense of community, making sure that we have committees in place. So just thinking about different committees that we can incorporate into the long list of committees that we already have. Thinking about how to have mental health committee. Think about how we can have like a youth advisory board or a youth or college age advisory board to get those individuals engaged.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Clerk, do we have any time in the bank with this candidate?
There are 14 minutes left in the bank.
Did you say 14?
14.
Okay, if you would display it on the clock, I'll yield. Any colleagues have any follow-up questions? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. This is a technical question. And I don't think our city attorney is here, though I saw her walking around earlier. I think that making a public declaration of your intent to run for office starts a clock on the requirement to form a campaign committee. And so I just wanted to give you the opportunity to clarify, and Mr. Baker, to clarify that you are not making a public announcement of your intent to run for office today, because I think there's some legal stuff that we probably don't want to have to happen just yet.
Question. Are
Yeah.
were you asking me or her?
I'm asking
Oh,
her.
okay, all right.
No, this is not my intent to campaign.
Okay, yeah, just, it becomes somewhat complicated when people declare that they are running for office
Okay.
in a public forum, which, as this is being broadcast, is a public forum. So, and for future candidates, for folks who are coming up, just want to make that clear. If you declare your intent to run for office today, you have 10 days to file a notice to like create a campaign committee, and it gets a little messy. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. This is a question I asked before, actually, in the cycle, and if there's no campaign, technically there's no office to run for, yet there's no race for them. There's no pending city council election. It's a hypothetical question that I did ask during our last time, actually with both, when Councilmember Caballero was elected, and the city attorney found no issue with it since there was no actual election to announce for. At the time, it was a hypothetical question, but the spirit of your question is definitely noted. Colleagues, anybody else have? Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a chance to elaborate a little bit further, just acknowledging subsidies are a great resource or tool for affordable housing. Just some of the others, acknowledging that you yourself are a landlord, that you thought might be helpful in kind of creating space for affordable housing.
So you're saying, aside from subsidies?
Aside from subsidies.
I think this creates a different kind of partnership that can happen between nonprofit organizations that are looking at ways to make housing more affordable or housing more attainable for residents. And this can look in the form of rental assistance, and not rental assistance in terms of making sure that you don't lose your rental housing, but giving you access to obtain rental housing. So I think the template of rental housing is that you pay first, last deposit, and that can be unaffordable for people. So making sure that, one, that there are organizations out there potentially that provide that assistance, and then possibly giving 3-4 months of rental allotment that could be repayable over some kind of term.
Thank you. And if I might, just one additional. I just wanted to just give a little bit more rope, I guess, in this, and just acknowledging that I think in one of your answers you implied essentially, I just want to say that more than just our citizens are our constituents, and if you want to speak directly to that, that would be helpful to clarify. Do you feel like our citizens are our only constituents?
No. I use those words interchangeably, but just Durham residents.
That was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Williams.
Could you help me see other ways of generating revenue in the city?
Outside of raising taxes?
Yeah.
Okay. Other ways of generating revenue, I would believe would be grant-funded support. So federal grants that are available can help subsidize some of the costs to make sure that we are meeting our goals.
Thank you. And one other thing, and this is because we have time. Give me other ways of support for residents outside of subsidies. And I'm not sure if you just touched on that, Councilmember Freeman, but I just heard you say subsidies a lot, and
Okay.
I want to hear, I guess you sort of explore more ways of helping folks get on their own 2 feet.
Partnerships outside of subsidies. So this is where we can expand our reach with public-private partnerships, talking to banks, talking to local nonprofits. I think those could be different ways to leverage resources to help individuals secure some kind of quality housing that's there. I think we also have the opportunity to think regionally and see what other areas are doing to support their residents, to make sure that they have those basic needs of shelter, safety, quality households.
Thank you. Glad to hear those responses.
Thank you, Councilmember Williams. Colleagues, anyone else? I have no follow-up questions for Dr. Diggs. If not, with our thanks, profound thanks, and thanks to the city, thank you again for stepping up and for being here today. And tomorrow night, we'll be receiving comments from the public, so you'll hear in the next coming days how we're going to be proceeding. So thank you so much for your time. And you're free to remain in the chamber and listen to your fellow candidates. If not, you're free to go. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so
Wish
much.
you all the best.
Colleagues, we all right to keep pushing forward? All right. The next candidate is Dr. Monique Holsey-Hyman, who I will welcome to the podium. Thank you so much for being with us today. You have 3 minutes for your opening statement.
Hello. I am grateful to the citizens of Durham, City Council members, and Mayor O'Neill for giving me the opportunity to interview for the at-large City Council seat. At an early age, my mother introduced me to public service. While growing up in the South Bronx of New York City, receiving housing, public housing and services. Along with my mother, I attended City Council meetings, education, and community action rallies. She fought for services for all. This is where my love for public service began. She constantly reminded us that she did not want us to be a victim of our environment. She inspired 4 daughters to go and get higher level of education. 2 of my sisters have passed on, they were educators, and my baby sister is the New York City Bureau Chief of the Department of Corrections. She pursued us to go on and get degrees, be servant leaders, and to never forget our humble beginnings, and to give back. These are examples of when people have resources. Starting my career in the 80s in New York City, the beginning of the crack epidemic, I worked in social services under the first African-American mayor, David Dinkins. He endorsed wraparound services for all populations at risk. I had the opportunity to develop an intensive case management mental health program funded by the State Office and City Office of Mental Health. After moving to Durham in 2006, I became involved in the community. I volunteer on several boards because I have experience in grassroots startup on a micro, meso, and macro level. I hear firsthand about the pressing issues facing Durham, such as gun violence, affordable housing, and shared economic prosperity. As a mother and a wife of a law enforcement officer and an educator, I inspired to sit on the City Council to be able to implement policies to benefit the citizens of Durham. Over my lifetime, I have been an advocate, a mentor, and I have used critical, innovative skills to analyze data, policies and procedures, and also the community's voice to make effective changes and decisions. The citizens of Durham want timely, solution-focused action. And I repeat, timely, solution-focused action that meets the needs of all diverse populations, regardless of economic background. Thank you.
Dr. Hyman, thank you so much for your opening statement. At this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Freeman, who will begin this round of questioning.
Thank you, Ms. Pro Tem. I am so excited. I have to say that I similarly have Bronx roots up in Kingsbridge, and could definitely hear you're pulling out my New York accent. I got to fight it back.
I haven't lost it in 6 years.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I just want to start by just acknowledging in your questionnaire as well, you noted your resources around, hold on, let me pull it back up. Let me start with the second question first. If you could just speak to I will say I started with the question around, and I'm taking too many notes. I started with the question around your voting history, and so I acknowledge you've been a voter in Durham for a number of years, and I could see from your voting history you voted every year. If you want to speak to how that civic engagement that you spoke to so vibrantly in your opening statement connects to the way in which you work in Durham, that would be helpful. And I'll pull up that.
It's important. Without people like you, city council members, I wouldn't be able to stand here in front of you today. It is important for us to vote for people who are going to really work with the people of Durham. And so not only do I try to vote, I also rally my students together. When I was at Shaw University, we took students from St. Aug, from Shaw University, and we walked to the polls because we want to get them also active in becoming, citizens who really care about what's going on. So it's very passionate to me because I know that I have to make my voice heard, and I have to also model and role model for other people.
Thank you. And if you could speak directly to the, to the way in which you make your decisions around, or the way in which you would make your decisions as a council member, who your resources are, who they would be, what kind of news outlets you would use in that instance, that would be helpful.
So as a social worker, we are trained to make decisions based on needs assessments and really going out and finding out what the community needs. But because of my experience on the Durham DSS board, a mental health board, I've had to make decisions based on where allocations are going to go. Are we going to take money from child welfare and take it over and put it over to the elderly? But I make those decisions based on informed knowledge. I look at data, I look at trends, I look at what the people want, right? And I'm okay with making a decision that's not really favorable. Recently, I've had to make a decision to, we have in Durham Social Services, there was a tax relief that they were giving people in Durham. And so we had to make a decision that we were going to extend it or not. And I wanted it to be extended because I felt like the reason why people weren't really knowing about it is because when I get a tax stuff, sometimes I don't even want to see that tax stuff. I got to see the tax stuff when I can pay it. And so they were putting things in their tax envelope, and they didn't know about what we were offering. So I said, listen, we need to extend it. So I'm able to vote on things, and I'm able to make decisions not based on sometimes the norm of what people want, but what really is important to the citizens.
And just acknowledging the huge, body of work we kind of look at all the zoning cases across the city and county. If you could speak to your experience around zoning and planning, that would be helpful.
Okay, so a lot of my experience, again, is from a social service, a social work background. But I can tell you from a personal experience, I was zoned from one area to another area to get better education. My mother zoned me from the Bronx, New York to Lafayette, Soundview area to Throsneck, where I was able to get a program where I had a 2-year SP where I got skipped, right? That stuff was not in my area. So zoning is very important. You have to make sure that when you're zoning that everybody, it's not just different areas where they're benefiting, that everybody needs to benefit. So while that's not my expertise, I'm a quick study, I'm a quick learner, and every board that I've been on, I didn't know everything about those boards. But I study, I do my homework, and I'm able to make informed decisions. And I'm passionate.
Thank you. That is all I have right now.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. At this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Johnson for her round of questions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you, Dr. Holsey-Hyman, for being here and for your willingness to serve our community. I'm just going to ask you the same question. What would be your first policy priority if you were appointed, and how would you pursue its adoption?
First policy. Well, I don't like to say affordable housing either. Affordable for who? We've got low economic people that really can't afford housing. You've got some middle class people that we're being outpriced, or I don't consider myself middle class, but that we're being outpriced in even terms of housing. So housing that people, of all people of Durham, can actually attain. All right, I'm not big on housing subsidies because I've had that experience many years ago. And you give someone a housing subsidy for this period of time, and then they can't sustain their housing because you lose the subsidy. You know, what I'd like to see is people who are coming into Durham, investors who are building houses and affordable places they claim for people to live, they gotta pay to play. If they're coming into Durham, they gotta make sure that they also are giving real housing that people are not spending more than 30% of their income. And we should be able to say to them that if they don't do that, they can't come to Durham. They cannot be here.
So given that we can't
I wish we could.
say that, unfortunately, we all wish we could. Yeah, what kinds of solutions do you think we should be implementing that we aren't doing right now?
I mean, I think that first of all, I'm so excited about the implementation of using social workers, because I'm a social work professor, to go out into the communities and kind of deal with some of the issues that police sometimes are maybe not trained to do. I just looked at some research from the Department of Justice that said 40% of police that are injured, high level, are from domestic violence cases. Right? That is crazy. So I want to commend you on first starting that initiative. But I'd like to see another initiative too with this. I would like to see, I know we have mobile crisis units, but I'd like to see a resource with a mobile crisis unit that has a medical professional, a mental health person, a housing subsidy person, a resource person, and a peer support, someone who has been through some of these things that people are going through so they can actually follow up. And I like to call it the Community Safety Intensive Case Management Mobile Crisis Unit. Now, I know sometimes I have these big dreams and want to do all this, but I also feel like you have to be creative and innovative to get things done.
No, I like that idea a lot. That's really great.
I got some more.
I'm looking forward to hearing more about them. So thank you. What do you think should be the role of local government in creating positive social change in the community?
Oh, so that is what I do. I am a social change agent. Like I said, without people like you, you wouldn't have Dr. Hyman sitting here. And so I think that we have a responsibility to the public, to our citizens, for them to understand that we're not just sitting on these seats because it's for fame or fortune, because none of you do that. You're sitting on these seats because you really want to make a difference. And so I think it is very much our responsibility to be able to go into the community. I had such a good time listening to the mayor's State of the Union address and how she said that she's been in the community. And you had gentlemen here that you were invited to the table. We need to be invited to the table more. We need to be able to go back into the community and really work with people and let them know that we are concerned. And when you cut us, our blood is red like yours.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your vision for the future of our community safety work and the development of alternatives to policing? You mentioned that you are excited about the role of social workers. You could, anything else that you want to say about that?
Yes, and I've got about 100 students coming out next week.
Please tell them to apply.
MSWs. Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Just what is your vision for creating safety in Durham, specifically with regard to our work with the Community Safety Department and alternatives to policing?
You've got to get buy-in from the community, right? We have to go into the community because, again, our gun rate. The communities where people are suffering is because they don't think that people care about them. Well, we do care about them. Well, we have to let them know that. And so the gun rate, youth programs, I'm really big on that, mentoring programs, being able to have training programs. And so because I'm on the DSS board and I'm an educator, I know that we have some training programs with Durham Tech where they're employing some of our, trying to get people to come into DSS and be just income maintenance workers, right? So we've got to continue to think of collaborative resources and innovative methods. I'm a community person. And I'm a person that has developed many programs within communities when I'm not here because I've been an educator, but in my other life. And so I've seen it work in a very combative situation where, like I said, beginning of the crack epidemic, where those case management programs, where those wraparound service programs, where family preservation programs, where those programs work. So I think that's my expertise, that I can give a different, I guess I'm going to say flavor to the city council, because I think some of the things that we're dealing with right now, the guns, the affordable housing, all those things are because people are suffering and they need change. And so my background as a social worker and a community advocate, I think would give a different perspective.
Thank you. Last question, who do you see as your base, and what are the most important values of the people in that community that you would bring with you to your service on the council?
My base are all the citizens of Durham. My base is to go in the, I'm going to say this, and I don't know if I was probably supposed to do this, but I was so excited to even be one of the 4. And I started doing some needs assessments myself. So anywhere I went, the car, washing my car, the big beauty world, Aldi's, I'm talking to people and I'm telling them, I'm excited about, and I said, what are some of the things that you think that we need to work on? And I'll say just 3 little, so there was a man that I met at the car wash that talked about he used to live in Durham. He moved out of Durham, and now he's in Cary because a couple of weeks ago, I think he said a month ago, his nephew was killed by gang violence. He comes back to Durham, and he volunteers at a boxing, I think it's a boxing program here in Durham. He loves Durham. He's still hurting. And we just talked about that at the car wash. I was checking out at Macy's, and one of the lady in front of me, she says, I'm excited about coming and stuff like that. And what do you think some of the things? She says, I live in Lakeside. She said, now we've got gun violence. She said, I'm making $16 an hour. I'm pregnant, I have 2 other children at home. I still don't make enough to live in a better area. People are facing issues here, right? COVID brought in a lot of trauma. I see it with my students, a lot of trauma, a lot of crisis, right? And so they're looking for us to like I said, solution-focused action. They want things to change now. Now, I have learned in my life that I can't make things happen right away. That's one of the things that I wish I could do, and I have learned that I have to slow it down. But I also have to be creative, and I also have to be innovative, and I also have to start to plan. One of the things I hate is being at a meeting for 24 hours and we get nothing done. I know we got to dig deep. I know we have to make sure that we, know all the things, but people want to know what we're doing, and people want to see results.
Thank you so much. I'm going to kick it back to Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Johnson. At this time, I'm going to give the Councilmember Williams for his round of questions.
Dr. Hyman, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here. Great job. So I would like to have a rich conversation. You talk a lot faster than I do. So.
I try not to. That's the New York. And then I'm nervous. I'm very humbled to be here today. You don't know. You don't know. This is full circle for me, so thank you.
I was there not long ago. So I want to ask you some questions. This is nothing to be taken personally, because y'all have a lot of supporters out there. It's an army. But I think it's important that we have rich conversation and ask some deep questions. So how do you define an economically strong Durham? And let me just go on through my bias. Could you factor in small businesses in that?
Yeah. I think small businesses took a hit with COVID. I think we need small businesses because that also brings to our economic growth. But I think we have to support small businesses. I think you talked about, it might be your next question, that we have all these job openings. I think we have to be creative to actually also encourage or give funding to small businesses to offer apprentice programs. Let's go back to the old way. Apprentice programs where they can hire some of the Durham citizens who may not have that certain educational level, but they can train them, right, to even work in their small business. So it's like a win-win situation. Because the corporations that are coming in, they're coming in, let's face it, with 6-figure jobs and above, right? Some of us don't make 6-figure jobs. I have to work, and I'm telling myself, 3 or 4 jobs, honestly, as a professor, to put 2 girls through school, okay? And so we've got to be able to give our small businesses support, but also with that support, let's try to see if we can support our citizens to kind of fill some of the like apprentice or some type of internship that turns into a paying job.
Thank you. I said you speak fast. You just went through some of my questions.
Sorry.
So like I said, I have some specific questions for each of you as well. So the one I have for you is, and speaking of Councilmember Reese, this is a debate that he and I used to go back and forth on. Do you believe that the city is a charity for the people or a business for the people?
a charity for the people. I don't see it as charity. I see it as we helping. I see it as trying to encourage all level of people to move from one level of functioning to a next. And people sometimes need help. You know, as a young lady, my mother and father separated out of 15 years. She didn't choose to go get public assistance, but she had to. And she remembers the young man who gave her a check when I was 3 years old, right? That's not charity. That is helping, that is giving resources, because without those resources, I could not stand here in front of you today.
That was for you, Charlie, if you're watching. Okay, thank you. Another question around, again, I'm on a mission to stop people from putting a period behind affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you, what are ideas you have in addressing that issue around affordable? How do we make it more affordable, and for who and how? Like, give me your whole perspective around that topic.
Again, I think, and I don't like that term either, I just graduated about 2 weeks ago as a Goodman Fellow, and we were able to have different people come and talk to us about different areas that are going on in the Triangle, and housing was one. And one of the things that I learned, someone came and they talked about there was a HUD house that basically a family was able to build, and then they sold it because an investor came and sold it for $250,000, and then he turned around and sold it for $400,000 or $500,000. That is outrageous, right? And so, like I said, I don't like to say affordable housing, but I think we have to build housing that people can obtain. Not only do we have to do that, but let me tell you the other thing that I have passion about. Once we get people in housing, we've got to give them the education to be able to keep that. That means financial literacy. That means budgeting, right? Because now you're paying rent, which might be, right now, it's more than what people actually can really make. So they got to sometimes decide, can they pay rent or can they go buy some food, right? And so we've got to put services in place so that once they get housing, that they could at least obtain. And what I also know is that families are living 4 and 5 generations in a home, in a place, right? Because they can't afford it, right? And so we've got to also have services for them to be able to stay and keep these houses. Like I said, financial literacy, the beautification of your own place, making sure that you are going to be proud about your person and environment. You know, as a social worker, we are trained to look at the person and environment, the systems that affect certain people and what is going on, and how do those systems affect how they live day to day.
Thank you. Back to this affordable housing topic, we tend to talk about the folks who can not necessarily afford, but the people who do have some sense of income coming in. But we don't really talk about the folks who don't have any income, and we don't talk about the folks who are having severe mental illness that's preventing them from obtaining any type of stable housing. Could you talk a bit about your perspective around the impact of mental health or mental illness in the housing instability?
You know, one of the things, like I said, I also try to lead by example, and I usually have my students go and be part of Count the Homeless, right? And you talk to people who are homeless who say, I really, you know, some of them are like, I'd rather be homeless. They don't want to do that, but the fact is that they don't know how they're going to be able to get an apartment, pay all those utilities, right? Do all those things when they don't really have the income to do it. And so mental health, crises that families are going through, right, affects whether or not they can keep sometimes their place of residence, right? And so I think, again, we've got a lot of community resources here, but we've got to have community resources that are working together in collaboration, right?
Thank you. And last question for me. You are a social worker. Well,
by trade, yeah.
By trade, you have that experience.
Yes, that's in my blood, yes.
Yeah, so let me ask you about a question outside of your expertise.
Okay.
So again, back to the business for the people. How do we create more resources to address these social issues? Because a lot of folks think that the city has a magic wand until they get on this dais.
Again, like I said, I just graduated as a Goodman Fellow, and in that program, we've had different people, like business owners, you know, different people from the Triangle. And it was amazing to me that some of these people who are in high-level positions, right, they want to help. They want to give back. They just don't know how to do it, right? And so even with that experience, I'm happy to say that a couple of my students, because as soon as I got back to Central and I knew that somebody at a high level could get one of my students a job, I'm going to connect them. And actually, one of my students is interviewing today for a position at Girls on the Run, right? So again, some of these corporations and some of these businesses want to help. They just don't know how to do it. But I think it needs to be a part of their conversation. It needs to be a part of their fabric. It needs to be when you are starting a business, you need to also have community service stuff. You need to have some housing stuff. You need to bring resources together because you're coming in to start your business, and yes, it's adding to our economic prosperity, but it's sometimes also hindering people from getting other resources. So we've got to have them build together and work together. Like I said, there's people out there that really want to help. 17 of the Goodman Fellows, some of them didn't even know how to, but I've told them how to do it, and we're going to make it happen.
Dr. Hyman, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to, as all the candidates, to speak with you today. I was looking in the screen here, and just full disclosure to all of you, I'm not upset. It's just cold up here. So I'm not frowning at you all. It's just cold. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Williams, and I'll yield to myself now. I'm next in this particular cycle of questioning. Dr. Holsey-Hyman, again, welcome, and thank you so much for your willingness to serve the people of Durham and for being with us today. So I want to use as a launching point your familiarity with needs assessments. The City Council is the final arbiter of city business for Durham. We're a policy-making body. So in your assessment, what are the 3 top issues facing Durham that we can address through policy as a council?
Definitely the safety of communities. Definitely and I hate to say affordable housing, but making housing accessible for all. And I also would say, which is where my passion comes from too, resources and youth developmental resources.
All right, and those aren't in any particular order. You just
Honestly, I'm going to say this, I might get in trouble, but I think we need to start with the youth because that's our future. And I just read and saw a documentary, I think it was on the WRL, that talked about the percentage of youth gangs in the public schools, right? So we got to start where our future is going to be. We definitely know we have issues now that we have to work on, but when we are long and gone, those youth are going to be sitting in these seats. And so we've got to put resources in. We've got to also expose them to different.
Sorry, would you suspend? The clock's not running, Madam Clerk.
Sorry.
I don't know. I'll govern myself accordingly. Go ahead, Dr.
Sorry. We also have to, like I said, and I can only draw from my personal experience, but without having being able to see other things outside of my environment, I wouldn't be able to, like I said, stand in front of you. I wouldn't have known that there's another life outside of the Soundview projects that I lived in, right? So we've got to make sure that they're linked to different resources and be exposed. We have some children here that have never been out of Durham. Let's take them out of Durham and let's expose them to things, but we want them to come back. We want also youth to think that there's more to being successful than being a basketball player, a football player, or a drug dealer. There are other ways to be successful, but they have to see it. We have to live and learn in social learning by example. We've got to look at the strengths. One of my best theoretical frameworks is strength-based perspective. You got a mother in McDougal Project with 10 kids, getting ready to be evicted. I would ask you on this council, what is her strengths? You might not be able to tell me, but the fact that she has 10 kids still together is a strength. Everybody has strengths no matter where they're at. We've got to be able to empower those strengths.
Thank you. In keeping with the theme of the council being a policy-making board, no matter how passionate any one of us are about an issue, it takes 4 votes.
That's right.
To make something happen. So how would you characterize your leadership style?
Oh my God, I'm a servant leader. I'm a transformational and visionary leader.
What about, do you consider yourself collaborative?
Oh, definitely. I'm a team player. I am a team player. First of all, you can't do anything in silos. And I also, in looking at the mayor's state, and she talked about how her and the commissioner are joined at the hip, right? So most of the things that I've been involved in have been under the council, city council, right? Not city council, excuse me, county, right? But you got to work together. You cannot work in silos. So I am a team player. There's some things that I'm not going to know, right? And there's some other things that you might need to ask me because I do have that grassroots experience of getting in the community and helping people go from one level of functioning to another. That's what we do as social workers. But I'm going to rely on the council to also educate me a little bit. Now, I know you ain't going to take a lot of time to do that because I know you need me to work. But I'm going to ask questions because I want to be able to be informed. If I don't know something, I'm going to ask my peers.
What areas will your passion make you more amenable to raise taxes in?
I would raise taxes in a minute for youth programs. I would raise taxes in a minute for gun, I know you're doing something called, I think it's called ShotSpire. I think you're very much an advocate on that. I think that's a good idea because guess what? Sometimes when you're in certain areas, nobody's going to tell you where that shot is coming because that's the culture of the area. I know I lived it, right? Can't tell it because this is your culture, right? And so I would raise taxes for definitely youth programs. I would raise taxes for mental health programs, resources, community resources. I would raise taxes.
You mentioned the crack epidemic. While you were in the Bronx, I was raised in an area that the New York Times called the crack capital of America in Red Hook, Brooklyn. I wasn't too far from you. And one of the things that the only option seemed to be to escape, to just leave the area. But we know that's not really an option for many of our folk here in Durham who face issues of violence and crime and gang life. So as a social worker, and forgive me if I'm being presumptuous, I'm assuming you would bring a certain amount of depth of thought and expertise in that area to the council if you were sat on the council.
Definitely.
What type of ordinances and policies would that translate into as a city government, your being up here, if anything?
I think it would help with people, citizens of Durham, understanding that there's someone, I'm not saying that you don't have that expertise, but someone who, number one, lives some of the things that they're going through. I'm not saying you haven't. And also being trained as a social worker and now as an educator to be able to do grassroots work. Right? Again, going back to this, and I have just so much experience in developing programs. Not only that intensive case management program that I literally started, we called them bodegas in New York. It was a store in the South Bronx, High Point area, and we started a community intensive case program there. I also was part of a federally funded program called the Friends Initiative, where we got federal money. So once I started this case management program for Steinway Child Family Service, we did well. Then we got another grant from the federal from the feds that said, we're going to go into different areas in New York that have the highest child welfare, the highest drug abuse, and the highest crime rates. And we want to put family preservation programs in these, and I started those programs. And I had to get buy-in. I had to go to all kind of meetings to get buy-in because people are like, you're not going to come in our areas and just do a collaboration for 5 years and then leave. So we had to get buy-in from the community to allow us to start some of these programs. And so I know firsthand what resources, wraparound dollars, and wraparound programs like Mayor you talked about in Wilmington, and you said you were so excited about it. I was like, yes, right? Those type of programs can exist, but you got to have the buy-in, and you got to have community partners. Because one thing I think that we have so many community partners, but nobody knows what each other's doing sometimes. We got to work together. That's why that Friends Initiative program was really good because the feds came and said, okay, Steinway, which was where I worked at, you're going to do case management. But now, Kelly, you are an investor with housing, you're going to do housing. Visiting nurse services, you're going to do mental health. And we had to work together. And we all had different missions and visions and all of that. But we had to work together to get those services in that community.
Thank you, Dr. Hyman. You self-identified, for the record, as being married to a law enforcement officer. How do you think that would impact, or how does that impact your view or shape your philosophy about policing, and how could we expect that to impact policy if you were to sit on this board?
Well, God willing, he'll be retiring in June, but he is, I don't know if I should say this, he's in the office, but probation and parole. But he gives me firsthand, like he comes home and he says, this is what we need. And so again, it makes me very passionate about some of the things that he says that the people that he deals with that comes back into Durham out of being in prison and on parole and stuff like that, the services. Re-entry is a big buzz. And that's nice. I think reentries, but we got to have the resources for people to come and be reentry into. So you asking somebody to come out of jail, right? And you're asking them to go to services, go to mental health, do a full-time job, and then also try to keep their families together, right? So we got to have priorities in what goes first. Right? All these things, they can't work together at one time because it sets them up to fail. They need the services, but how do we collaborate and put the priority of services for what they need first?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hyman. It's been an honor to speak with you. And at this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Caballero for her questions.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Same question. As council members, we often have, and you've answered some of this already, so I appreciate that, but as council members, we often have to make hard, complex decisions from zoning to policing to passing our annual city budget. Often these decisions are contrary to our values or what we believe the job would be. How do you plan on squaring that contradiction, and how do you plan on communicating that to supporters who may be disappointed in your decision?
So one of the things I will say that I've had experience in this already, being on a mental health board years ago and being the vice president now of the DSS board, I get a lot of calls from people. I get emails. I don't know how they find out all my emails, but I get emails and they're talking about some of the things that we're doing well, and then sometimes they're talking about things we're not doing well. I remember when I was on the DSS board, I had a lot of anonymous calls about people saying that the mental health board was not indicative, didn't look like the people who were higher in administration, doing mental health, didn't look like the people in the community, right? And so what I did with that is I brought it back to, at that point, it was the Durham Mental Health Board, and we came with a task force to address that. So I get those calls, I get those emails, I get, Dr. Hyman, what are you going to do? And sometimes I can't do everything that they want me to do, but what I do is take it back to our director at DSS and let them know this is the person who's emailed me, this is what this person needs, how can we get them the resources that they need, right? So that they feel like they are being heard. And I will say that I am so blessed to sit on the DSS board. I am so blessed that I actually had a hand in hiring a new director who has changed that vision, who, while people now do not just see it as a place where, oh my goodness, I'm coming for services, that sometimes they see it as they really can come in for help. The culture has changed, and we've all been a part of that. And so I'm very proud to say that. So again, I've dealt with a lot of that already, but I think people want to know, you've made the decision, you might have not made it the way I wanted you to make it, but how is that going to impact me? And I think being transparent.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Caballero. Madam Mayor?
Dr. Holsey-Hyman, thank you for being here. So glad to be able to have this opportunity to speak to you. I have the one question. That's your vision for Durham over the next 2 years. And how will you get the council to buy into that vision and work in a collaborative manner to bring it forth?
Vision for Durham, I will say one of the reasons why I also moved to Durham is because it was diverse. It gave me an opportunity to raise my 2 young ladies in a different environment, to expose them to things that they might have not been exposed to in New York City. And I want that to continue. I want people to want to live in Durham. I don't want people to say, I'm moving out of Durham because no, I want them to stay here. I want them to love Durham. I love Durham. Even though I wasn't born here, I love it. I've been here since 2006. And I think my vision is to make sure that we have resources, right? Collaborative resources, collective resources, innovative resources to help us deal with some of these goals, the vision that you have in the strategic plan. And I think my expertise, like I said, in startup, quality assurance, personal experience, I know what people need because I've lived it. I know that people need resources. Without programs, without educational programs. Let me just say, education is a tool to success. Now, everybody does, or even trades. Without that, I could not really have raised my girls to be a point where that now they don't have to live. When I take them back to New York, they're like, you lived here? Yes, and I'm proud of it. Because without me living there, you wouldn't be where you're at. And so I think we have to empower people to feel proud about where they come from, give back. And that's why I don't mind telling my story. People say, yeah, I remember going into a store and having to tear out food stamps and be actually teased by people. And I remember my mother saying to me, she said, look in that mirror. She said, let me tell you something. There's other people that are using that too. But that's not going to define who you are. And so now I can sit on a board where I make other decisions for other little Moniques that might be out there, all the little Jims or Johns or whoever that might be out there don't think that they have a way, but they do.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Clerk, how much time do we have in the bank on this candidate?
We have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, are there any quick clarifying questions for this candidate?
Thank you. I just wanted to just touch back. I appreciate you sharing so much today. And I can appreciate your passion around, making sure that the other Moniques do get passed. I just wanted to touch on just one. Whenever someone says citizens, it just kind of creates a kind of collective group of people who are left out of the conversation. So I just want to make sure I touch back and say, when you say citizens, do you recognize that our constituents go beyond just the citizens who might be voting for us?
Yeah, I'd say stakeholders. Can I say community, community partners, right? I'm very much aware.
Just residents.
Yeah, let me tell you, I was a resident.
And
I
then,
was someone who again, needed those services.
and then just a follow-up, if you don't mind. Just acknowledging, I do want to say that my mom actually worked at Banana Kelly, so it was interesting that you even mentioned it.
That was our federal funded, yeah.
I remember, I do recall. When you talk about the kind of re-entry programming that we do you have thoughts around how it could be shaped differently?
I can give you a case scenario. I had a young man that came into my office years ago, was one of the biggest drug dealers in North Carolina. And he said to me, I've been told I'm not going to be, I'm not, I was like, no, you're worth something. And we're going to make sure that you get through this program. And this is when he was at Shaw University. I'm going to make it fast. 2 years ago, I hooded him, and he is now doctor, right? Because I gave him the empowerment to say you can do this, and you're not, and you're not going to be a victim of the environment. So I think we need more educational programs. We need things to start before they even get into the community. Now, I know years ago when I was at Shaw University, we used to have a program where we actually went into the prisons and we taught people in the prisons, and I know they lost that program due to funding. But I think it needs to start before they come out. You can't have them come out and, okay, now you need to do A, B, C, and D. So a lot of training, a lot of case management programs, so when they come back into the community, you're linking them to services, and making sure that they are aware of what they need to be, I don't want people to say, well, the only way that they can be successful is they leave Durham. No, they're Durham citizens too. And so we've got to come up with programs where they want to stay. And again, I know as a social worker, sometimes sometimes I've had to tell my clients, you gotta change people, places, and things. Well, how do you tell that person that has to go back to that same area that maybe got them in trouble before they went in? So I remember telling one of my clients, you might can't walk down Avenue B, just for example, because the Avenue A is where they're selling crack. You might have to go around 10 steps to get to that house to help you not go back, right? We can't change people's environments. What we have to do is add to the environment.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Freeman. Just one quick question. If you are not selected, do you see yourself in the future running for a seat on this council?
I do. I see myself, I think I've made a lot of difference in the things that I've done, but as my daughter, who's at Chapel Hill, who wants to be a lawyer, says, Mommy, you need a bigger platform. so I do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hyman. I appreciate you.
Thank you, and I appreciate you all, and I'm very humbled. I don't think you understand what it means to me to stand up here today.
Well, on behalf of a grateful city, we appreciate you stepping out.
Thank
for us.
you.
You're welcome to stay in the chamber if you like to listen to our final candidate, who I'll invite to the podium now, Dr. Henry McKoy, who is our final candidate, and we welcome him to the podium and to deliver his 3-minute opening statement. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, councilmen and councilwomen, for this opportunity. I'm Henry McKoy. I love Durham, and I love Durham passionately. I've lived my entire adult life here in Durham. Over the last 25 years, I've worked my entire professional career here in Durham, absent of the time I was in the Department of Commerce. I started out with Central Carolina Bank, that's now grown to become Truist. I've worked downtown from what is not a 21C hotel, Gear Street, and what was, until most recently, the South Bank building. I've gotten a chance to watch as our community has evolved as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, and now as an educator. I've raised my family here in Durham, sent my 2 children through Durham Public Schools, and I'm just passionate about this place. And even though I've lived here as an adult, I've actually had a lifelong relationship with Durham. Much of my childhood was spent between Fayetteville and Durham, and I feel like that this work is some of the most important work that there is. From an educational standpoint, I think I've been well educated to stand before you and offer up this opportunity or be a part of this opportunity. A BSBA from UNC Chapel Hill in business, Master's in Environmental Leadership from Duke Nicholas School, and a PhD in City and Regional Planning from UNC Chapel Hill in Inclusive Economic Development and Entrepreneurship. From a professional standpoint, I had the opportunity, as I mentioned, to be a banker here in the community and work with small businesses, work around things like sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability. I was the former Assistant Secretary of Commerce here in the state of North Carolina under Beverly Perdue, where I got the chance to oversee community economic development for the state of North Carolina. I was the chief planner for the state, the community investment lead, over community development block grant funding, affordable housing, the Main Street urban planning, and I got a chance to work with what we call the have-nots. And even within the have-nots, there are haves and have-nots. In recent years, I've held appointments where I currently serve at North Carolina Central University School of Business, where I oversee the entrepreneurship program, Kingdom Flagler Business School, Duke University Nicholas School, where I teach public-private partnerships and teach in the Sanford School of Public Policy, the Cook Center on Social Equity, and in recent times served at Harvard Kennedy School, where I oversaw a national and global record on equitable cities. I feel like that Durham is at a critical crossroads, and I hope to have an opportunity to be a part of this decision-making going forward. I've had a chance over the course of my career to work with hundreds of cities, city leaders across North Carolina, across the United States, and across the world. And I want to thank you all for having this opportunity to talk to you and being named one of the 4 finalists. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. McKoy, and again, thank you for being with us. And we're going to start this round of questioning with Councilmember Johnson. I yield to her.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Dr. McKoy, for being here and for your willingness to serve our community. Same question, so you probably got good answers by now. What do you believe should be the role of local government in creating positive social change in the community?
Well, thank you for that question, Councilwoman Johnson. I think the local government plays a critically important role. If you think about the history of the United States and history of communities, government oftentimes has to play the role of being a leader and taking risks sometimes to actually step out there and make sure that all the citizens have the equal rights that's protected, that's given to them under the Constitution, under the local laws. And I think that the local government is no different. I think that there's an opportunity for local governments to be ambitious in how they think about their citizens, to be ambitious in how they operate and move forward, and set the stage for what others can do, including what the private sector can do as part of that partnership. And so I think that through so many different ways, the local government has a key role in this idea of creating positive social change.
Thank you. Could you tell us what your first policy priority would be and how you would pursue its adoption?
Well, I think that one of the things that is so important as I look at Durham and the change of Durham, I think is how we think about the leveraging of our public land and land use. I think there's key opportunities to think about how we utilize land use to not only create opportunities for, we've talked about housing, but also economic equity and equitable development. And so for me, one of the key aspects that I think we can look at here in Durham is how do we think about the land that we do have relationships with, whether they be the public lands or through additional partners. How do we create opportunities to utilize that land for the highest and best use for the overall community? I think one of the things that we have to make sure of is that the thing that has made Durham this destination for so many people, this place of diversity, this place of inclusion, that we do not lose that in our areas of growth. And so I think growth and equity can work together. And I think that we as a community, as a governing body, could look at opportunities to create policy that really does intersection at that growth and equity standpoint.
Thank you. What is your vision for the future of our community safety work and specifically the development of alternatives to policing in Durham?
Well, I think, in my opinion, one of the great opportunities that we do have is to think about, again, in this place that we have so much growth and so much economic expansion, how do we make sure that everybody is connected to that growth and economic expansion? I feel like that people want to be heard. People want to be a part of a vision for a community. And I think that if we can create economic opportunity for all, then that in itself helps to curtail some of the challenges that we see oftentimes when it comes to issues around crime or gun violence and things of that nature. People who have bright futures to look at, people who have opportunities do not necessarily go around committing crime. And so I think from that standpoint, one of the great opportunities that we have is in making sure that everyone is connected to this economic growth. And then from that standpoint, obviously there's a place for policing in the community. But I think in Durham, I think we have such a huge opportunity to step into that gap of connecting folks at earliest stages possible to upward mobility and economic opportunity. And I think that will then, along with certain opportunities around community impact and folks going into different neighborhoods and communities and working with the citizens, will help us as we think about the future of Durham from that standpoint. And I think that will have a positive impact on how we think about policing in our overall community.
Thank you. Do you support the work that the Community Safety Department is doing to provide unarmed crisis response and hopefully in the future unarmed traffic response? And would you support expanding that work in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly believe that we have too many incidents that end up in young people of color, particularly African Americans, ended up dead from folks interacting and overreacting in situations. I think there certainly is a great opportunity to have that interaction with unarmed law enforcement and community leaders who can come in and de-escalate the situation, who can address the situation without, resorting to gun violence and things of that nature. So I certainly support this idea of finding better ways to engage folks in the community without having to engage folks who are armed and who could ultimately, end someone's life in such a situation.
Thank you. Last question, who do you see as your base and what are the most important values of the people in that community that you would bring with you to your service on council?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that I have a pretty broad base. I think that I've been fortunate to be able to work across Durham with a lot of different communities. For me, I think those who care about the idea of equity would be my base. Those who think about particularly racial and economic equity are those who I tend to, get a chance to work with across the board. And I think to that same point, those who care about having a Durham whose future is diverse, who's equally diverse, racially diverse, who creates upward ladders of mobility for individuals, who create economic development without gentrification. I think those people, I would say, are my base, and I think those are things that they really care about. Is what does Durham look like in the future, and how do we make sure it's a place for everybody?
Thank you, Dr. McKoy. I appreciate it, and I kick it back to Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Johnson. At this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Williams for his questions.
Dr. McKoy, it's great to see you, and thanks for being here. Congrats on making it to the Final Four. I'm looking forward to a rich conversation. This is nothing to be taken personal, just want to make sure we can get a lot in here. So a lot of what you talk about is economics in Durham. So what does an economically strong Durham look like to you?
I think an economically strong Durham to me looks like a place where everybody can see their part in that shared prosperity. It's where people can see their future, whether it be through a job opportunity, whether it be through entrepreneurship, whether it be through some means of being able to see upward mobility, where seeing a way that they can support their families, support themselves, and feel like that they're welcome here. And so from an economic standpoint, one thing I try to really think about is as we talk about the economic growth and companies and organizations come to town, and sometimes we have this conversation around these community benefits agreements and things of that nature. And I think community benefits agreements are fine, but I also feel like that we need more, meaning that we need, instead of, as a company comes here, that we only think about individuals from underrepresented communities having the lowest jobs or the entry-level jobs or things of that nature. How do we think about being a part of the corporation at all levels? How do we think about, if you're talking about construction or development, folks having not only they're going to live in a place, but they also have the opportunity to develop that site. So I think economically viable or a vibrant Durham means that people see themselves in all facets of the economy as it's growing, as it's expanding, and as it's moving forward.
Thank you. In regards to government, what 3 areas do you think we need to improve as a local government? You can address it from us as a council, or us as a municipality, or us as a city. What 3 areas would you say we need improvement on? And how would you improve it?
Thank you for that. So certainly from this, as I return to this idea of equitable economic development, and so I think that we could do a better job in thinking about how do we make sure that all community members are a part of this economic development. That may mean how do we facilitate if we're going to recruit firms to town, how do we facilitate that recruitment, and how do we make sure that those firms come to town, recognize what we really want to see as it relates to connecting to all our citizens and well-paid jobs, and again, allows upward mobility. I think it's also important as it relates to investing in our own entrepreneurial ecosystem, particularly here in those populations that have been left behind or have been in recent times disinvested in. So how do we make sure that we are creating a pipeline of entrepreneurs from all walks of life all around the community to create jobs, to create connectivity, because who owns those businesses has a huge impact on who ends up creating the apprenticeships, creating the internships, donating to charity, what kind of charity, hiring folks, and all those kind of things, and the family networks that come with those ultimately creates wealth. And so I think the equitable economic development is incredibly important. We talked about the idea of affordable housing and not stopping at the period. I think affordable housing, the flip side is the affordability of housing, right? The ability to afford the community that you live in. And so I think it's so important that we think about how do we make sure that folks have the economic opportunity to be able to afford to live here in the community. I think one of the things that for me is important when we think about that is really the sense of how do we make sure that we have spaces that people feel they're welcome in, that we have places that are vibrant, that are diverse, but that people feel like that they can come and be a part of, and that they feel like their culture or their community is represented here, and that they're not being pushed out of Durham. And so I think that creating both housing that's affordable, but also creating communities that can afford to live here are important. And I certainly think that in addition to that, it's also important to, as we talk about, again, the issues around violence, we can't separate that from thinking about what opportunities are we presenting our kids and our communities in some of the most challenging circumstances. And so I think for me, those things go hand in hand when we talk about economic development, that if we can address some of those core issues, that a lot of the other pieces will create resources to be able to make those additional investments.
Thank you. Thank you. Each candidate has had pretty much a laser focus on a specific issue or topic. What is yours?
Well, my laser focus is this idea of equitable economic development. And what I mean by that is, again, as I said, I think that it's not that there's only one way to do something, but I recognize that in a situation where whole parts of your community is left behind and left out, then their future is all essentially relying on somebody's charity in some ways. I feel like that people want meaningful lives. They want to have opportunity to make decisions that they feel like are best for them. And I think they want to connect to the overall community as it grows. And so for me, a key part of this is understanding, how do you create vibrant economic ecosystems that are inclusive and equitable, particularly.
Cordell, and I think you sort of touched on this already, and this will be my last question. In layman terms, how do we leverage this growth and prevent our community from being a victim to the regional, to this regional growth?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think that's a great question. I think part of it is having the vision, understanding, and about what this shared prosperity will look like. I think another thing is we talk about investment that comes into the community. I think we have to look at there are these networks of impact investing, impact investors that I've had a chance to work with, and these are individuals who are looking to invest in growth, but they're also looking to invest in equity and inclusion. So all money is not the same money, and I think part of that is creating an environment where we are looking to bring capital to bear, and whether that be a connection between public capital and private capital that in itself is looking for these kind of equitable outcomes. And so I think part of it is being very intentional about that as we create an environment around that. I think in addition to that, I think it is, there's some aspects of policy that we could really focus on that does attract the kinds of industries and businesses and opportunities that we feel like will connect to individuals across our landscape. And so I think from a very basic standpoint, it's being very intentional about understanding where the kind of capital and the kind of businesses are that we've been looking for, and identifying those and welcoming them into the community and creating the kind of policy that it may take to get them here.
Thank you, Dr. McKoy. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Williams, and a lot now falls to me. Dr. McKoy, thank you so much again for being with us today and for your willingness to serve the city. So let me start with, I guess, kind of an elephant at the beginning. Because this is a selection process, not an election process, there's a higher burden, at least I feel there's a higher burden on us as a council acting in the stead of the people, almost a sacred burden on us to be really, really deliberate in this process, because ultimately these seats are owned by the people, belong to us, and we're acting in their stead. So with that, I want to ask you, Dr. McKoy, about an issue that's been in the public square and public arena. You've been in the vanguard of the leadership of a movement that is appealing to us to insert ourselves or get involved in a decision that DHA made to award a contract to a particular interest. And it, by all public accounting, you have a personal vested interest in one of those that made appeal to the DHA. So for the record, tell us, how do we avoid, if we were to select you, not looking like we were handing you a pass when you are actively petitioning this council for relief in a matter that you're vested in, and you would indeed have a vote on that matter if even we were legally empowered to act in it, which I don't think we are, but if we were, how do we avoid those optics?
Well, thank you for the question. Just for transparency, so I have no economic interest in the Hayti Reborn effort. Not only do I have not like a equity stake in it, I have not ever been paid out of that. My work with that community has been on behalf of the community, having been invited by the community to be a part of that, to be a part of that conversation. And so from a standpoint of having any kind of vested interest, again, outside of working with the community, I have no economic interest at all. And again, regardless of how the project was to turn out, there's no economic change to my condition at all. So I want to make that clear from that standpoint. In terms of that particular work, I do feel like that I've heard the question up here a few times in terms of this idea of hearing people and making decisions that are hard. This particular push around this particular land and this particular project, again, it was from the community coming to me, asking me to help out in this scenario. The actual issue as relates to this particular project came about because many people in the community felt like that this was not a transparent process by the Durham Housing Authority, and they asked me to help with that process. And
Let me say, Dr. Moore, and I'm sorry, in the interest of time, because it was not my intention to have you litigate the whole issue or go through a whole narrative, but I'm glad I gave you an opportunity to clarify that. So just for the record, you're not a consultant in any way to the...
I mean, I'm helping them, but again, I have no economic interest at all. I mean, I'm a community member who was asked to help on this project with the community who was trying to get their vision put forth for the last 7 years. So no, I'm not a paid consultant. I'm not anything to that effect.
Okay. What are the top 3 major challenges facing our city that we can address as a policy-making board?
Yeah. Well, I think again, this idea of the thing that seems to be the thing that has made Durham so incredibly vibrant and popular, this idea of inclusion and diversity, I think is a challenge going forward because so many folks are being displaced, so many people are being pushed out from a standpoint of housing. We see not only residential gentrification, we see commercial gentrification. We see all these kind of things that are, again, creating a place that looks very different from the place that folks tout publicly. And so I think we have to find a way to, as this growth is coming, we have to find a way by which this community is able to connect growth and equity. And I think that is an incredible challenge. I think when you connect that growth and equity, then it connects to so many other things, whether it be education, whether it be housing, whether it be jobs, whether it be, just space. And so I think that finding a way to create a more prosperous, shared prosperity across the community is really, in my mind, one of the most incredible challenges that we face.
Thank you for that. You like other of your fellow candidates, have had significant exploits in the academy and have a number of other platforms. I'm curious, as we're a policymaking board and it takes 4 votes to make anything happen. I'm curious as to how you plan on translating what you're doing in so many other arenas as a policymaker on this board. What is it that you hope to see differently in the work product of this government and the outcome of this council that your 1 vote would combine with hopefully 3 others make a difference in? What is it that you hope to see policy-wise?
Well, I think from a policy standpoint, again, creating this community, I get a chance to work not only in the academic space, but in the practical space. I work across hundreds of cities across the United States, across the world. I get a chance to see communities struggle with these kind of issues all the time. It gives me a perspective that I think allows to bring not only this kind of academic sense to it, but also this practical sense to it. I think that there are a lot of policy options that we have that we often, it's not necessarily that maybe we don't know that we have, but I think when you can understand, again, what does the law allow you to do from a standpoint of policy making as relates to the federal and the state level, but also what is possible based on what other places are doing, and sometimes what do we have to do to be at the vanguard of that work ourselves. And so I think that when I listen to this particular city council, I know that the city council is passionate about equity. I know the city council is passionate about those kind of things. I think there's a lot of opportunity to create policy that helps to move us down that path, and being able to see it sometimes at a 30,000 level view as well as on the ground, I think gives the opportunity to act in some creative, innovative ways.
If you're not selected to sit in this seat, do you foresee yourself participating in electoral politics in the future and seeking a seat on this council?
Yes, I do.
All right. What would you be willing to raise taxes for?
Well, I think I'd be willing to raise taxes for an opportunity to create a community that is balanced as it relates to equity and inclusion, and particularly in thinking about how do we address issues of past harm? How do we address issues that would allow communities who have been left behind, who haven't seen investments in a very long time, how will we create a situation where we can make investments in those communities? I've seen communities who have been asking for, investments for decades, and it never seemed to have been able to get those investments in. And so I think that there's an opportunity to be creative in how we make investments in those particular communities.
Everyone, this last question, everybody on this dais literally represents thousands of people each. We each have our own constituencies, but at the end of the day, it takes 4 of us to get something done. How would you characterize your leadership style? And what would it look like in this particular space, in a public policy setting, municipal government space?
I think my style is collaborative. I seek to hopefully find consensus. I try to bring the best information forward and try to understand what other folks bring to the table and what they would like to see. And I mean, I'm not new to government. I mean, again, and so I certainly having to work not only here locally with a number of bodies that you all have put me on, and not at the state level and other things. I mean, I feel like I work collaboratively across different groups.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKoy. I appreciate you taking my questions. At this time, I'm going to yield to Councilmember Caballero for her questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good to see you. Same question. You've heard it now. This will be the 4th time. As council members, we often have to make hard, complex decisions, from zoning to policing to passing our annual city budget. Often these decisions are contrary to our values or what we believe the job would be. How do you plan on squaring that contradiction, and how do you plan on communicating that to supporters who may be disappointed in your decision?
Thank you. I think that people understand that they can't always win. I think that's the reality, that you win some, you lose some. I think where the challenge comes in if one group always loses, another group always wins. I think that's where people sometimes have the problem, and the question becomes, how do we make sure that there are, equal chances of success? I mean, if there's going to be equal chances of success, equal chances of failure, whatever the case, how do we make sure that we have that? And so I think that if people, if they feel like that it's been a fair process, an equitable process, that they are willing again to take some losses in the hope that they will get some wins. And so for me, I recognize that every day is not going to be a day that you end up getting all that you want. But I think if the process is one that is equitable and transparent, then people are willing to absorb that. And I think that having those conversations with folks are a lot easier whenever you can truly say that your concerns were taken into consideration. This is how the decision was made, and this is how the decision came out. And so for me, I don't mind having conversations with folks who ultimately feel like that, that again, maybe they haven't gotten what they wanted. As long as I can look them in the eye and be honest with them and say, well, hey, this is how this process worked, and you got a fair shot like everybody else.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Caballero. At this time, I'll yield to Councilmember Freeman for her question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I acknowledge that I have worked with Dr. McKoy on many different levels and many different conversations, and I appreciate the previous question, and I want to give you a chance to kind of clarify a little bit more around how the Hayti Reborn development and your role kind of coalesced before this process began.
Okay. Yeah, so just the high level, about 7 years ago, the community came to me, and I mean community meaning the folks along the Fairville Street corridor and around the Fayette Place project, and asked if I could be helpful in them thinking about what it looks like to create an economic development project that went beyond simply housing, but also looked at economic development. And so I engaged in that process. The city, the county, a number of different folks came to the table around that. As just from a timing standpoint, I mean, this work has certainly happened long before Councilman Reese stepped down. So I mean, it was already actively going, and so my role with the community has been, again, someone who has helped them to have their voice heard and have their voice found around what they have asked of me to help bring forth in the community. And so, so I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Yes, thank you. And just going back to some of the questions I've asked others, acknowledging that the council actually has a pretty heavy focus around planning and zoning cases that come before us, along with their budget. But in the planning and zoning, could you speak to your experience and how you would use that to make the decisions around those cases?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, my PhD is in city and regional planning from UNC School of City and Regional Planning. I also served as the top planner in the state here in North Carolina as part of the North Carolina Department of Commerce under Governor Beverly Perdue, where I oversaw an office of over 20 planners from across the state of North Carolina that worked in communities across the state, rural, urban, some of the poorest areas you could imagine, and also worked with some of the larger cities. And so during that time period, I got an opportunity to really engage very deeply in the work of the planning process and understanding how it guides the city and how zoning can make an enormous impact. And for those who've been around long enough, in the previous inclination, I had the chance to work in a number of inclusionary zoning efforts and things of that nature. So, yeah, I mean, I think zoning can have a huge impact on how a community developed, and I'm a proponent of what I call equity by design.
And just building on that answer and the question, acknowledging how the city council plays a role in that, I can appreciate that you have a long voting history here in Durham. Can you speak to how the selection and, I guess, the role that the city council plays in being able to do that?
Yeah, so I think that it's an incredibly important role that the city council plays in deciding, what gets put up and how it gets put up and the rules by which developers and others operate. And so I certainly think that, particularly at a time where, there's some levels of control or things that you can have from a standpoint of working with the private folks, but there's also an incredibly important work that can be done in thinking about the public lands and the public works that can be done here. And so I think the council really perhaps is sitting in a critical role right now that will help determine the future of what Durham looks like. I think we're at a crossroads now as it relates to whether growth will basically eat us or whether it will be something that we utilize as a means of creating that shared prosperity that we all talk about. And so I think the council serves a critical role in making sure that the way the community develops going forward will be something that all of Durham can really feel like that they're a part of and feel like that they're not being left behind, left on the sidelines to watch it happen around them.
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. Decision-making, and just noting from your questionnaire, there were a number of folks that included in the questionnaire the resources they use. Are there any additional resources that you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think what the question in the questionnaire, of course, talked about decision-making processes, and I feel like that decisions are best made from a comprehensive viewpoint. I think you have the opportunity to look at data, look at research. Also, you have the opportunity to listen to people and their voices. You have the opportunity to seek out expert advice. You have the opportunity to understand what is even allowable within the context of law. I think all those things are critically important in thinking about making a decision, in addition to what are going to be the long-term impacts and effects on this, and who will be impacted by this, who will benefit, who will not benefit. And so I think all of those things should be brought to bear whenever any decision is made. And as they say, thinking about, 7 generations ahead, I mean, certainly there's things that have to be made right this moment, but we also have to think about it from a long-standing perspective and understanding how it's going to impact so many other aspects of the city and the residents and other stakeholders.
Thank you. And just one last question. I think what overwhelmingly comes across is that there's kind of a blame that's placed on people that are poor, and I just want to ask, how do you feel or what do you think makes people poor in our community economically?
Well, I think that there's a lot of factors. I feel like that, but a key of that is that we often treat certain parts of the community, particularly Black and brown folks, like they're a problem, like they're expendable, like we need to find something for them to do as opposed to engaging them. I think I said like this. I often talk about the fact that we're all living in this same world, but we live in very separate conditions a lot of times, and everybody wants to feel like that they're a part of the community. They want to feel like they're a part of the future. And I have to tell my students this, young people and everybody want to feel like that they are, they can be part of shaping the world that they want to see. They can be part of creating the world that they want. They don't want to just have to figure out how to fit into the world that they have. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have, is that we often look at poor people like, oh, well, you should be satisfied to just fit in the world that we give you, as opposed to being a key contributor to the world that we all want to see, which is one of shared prosperity. And so I think that we, I say to this point, I think that we can utilize things like NCCU a lot more. I think NCCU is an underutilized asset in the community. I feel like that the communities around them are underutilized assets, and I think we need to look at people and communities as assets and not liabilities.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. At this time, I'm going to yield to our Honorable Mayor.
Good afternoon, Dr. McKoy.
Yeah.
So glad to have the opportunity to spend time with you and the other finalists today. And I have one question, which is, what is your vision for Durham for the next 2 years? And how will you get the council to buy into that vision and work in a collaborative fashion to bring it to fruition?
Thank you for that question, Mayor. It may sound a bit out of here and crazy, but I mean, my vision for Durham is that Durham becomes the most racially and economically equitable city on the planet. And as someone who has traveled around a lot and did this work, I believe that it's possible. And looking at other communities and working with other communities, I always return to the idea that when we talk about this sense of equity, that if there's a place that can make this happen, it is Durham. And I think the great thing about that is that I actually believe that this council actually wants that. And it certainly is easier if you have colleagues who believe in equity and inclusion as well, because it's not always the case when I go around to other places that everybody's on board with that. And so for me, it's identifying, and that doesn't mean that Durham is perfect. It doesn't mean that everything that happens in Durham is perfect. What it means is that folks are aspiring to create a place where everybody feels like that their voice is heard, that they are equitable, that they have a chance for open mobility, they have a chance to take part in this growth without being displaced. And so for me, I think that is the vision I have, and that would cover across all kinds of different boards. How do we make sure that we're creating a pipeline of opportunity for young people in Durham to be what they want to be and anything they can be? How do we help to create an atmosphere where investments are coming into all parts of Durham and elevating those populations and helping them achieve their dreams? How do we make sure that all zip codes in Durham are able to benefit from prosperity, and the places that aren't, that we able to go in and create some placemaking? We shouldn't have to wait until a place is ready for gentrification to say, oh, well, now we can invest here. I mean, it should come before that. And so I believe that a key part of the vision for Durham over the next several years can be being as ambitious as we can around creating the most equitable city that anyone's ever seen, and figuring out what are the policy levers to do that, who are the public-private partnerships and the other partners that can come in and help do that, and how do we engage all of the city around that. And to the second part of the question, I believe that from everything I've seen, that this is a council who really cares about this idea of shared prosperity and equity. And so I would hope that, thinking about the different efforts that each of you have pushed forth and identified as being passionate about, have all in one way or another connected to equity. And so I think that there is an opportunity to continue to usher that forward.
Well, thank you, Dr. McKoy, for that answer. And I'm going to yield back to you, Mayor Pro Tem, but I do want to thank all of our finalists for being here this afternoon. This has been a learning session for me today, and I thank all my colleagues for being here as well and their wonderful questions. I thank our city clerk who has put this effort in and helped us to organize, and I thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for leading this effort, and I also thank your able colleague, Councilwoman Johnson, who has helped to bring this to pass. So I yield back to you.
Madam Mayor, thank you so much, ma'am, for your confidence and trust. And I know I speak for Councilmember Johnson as well, when it's been a pleasure. Madam Clerk, do we have any time left in the bank?
We do. We have 8 minutes.
Okay. Colleagues, does anyone have a clarifying question or follow-up? Dr. McKoy, thank you so much. On behalf of a grateful city, thank you for your time. You're excused.
Thank you.
From the podium. Before I turn it over to the mayor for our dismissal, just a way of housekeeping to all of our residents and citizens watching this broadcast, and those of you in the chamber, on tomorrow evening, May 3rd at 6 p.m., it's the people's turn to speak. We want to keep fidelity with the concept and proposition that these seats do indeed belong to the people. Although this is a selection process, we thought it very important, as we've done in the past, to hear from the people of Durham. So I'll say to every candidate, marshal your forces and alert your folk. Avengers assemble. Get your people out tomorrow who would like to speak on your behalf individually, and we will gather here in the chamber tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. We anticipate, after receiving comments from citizens and residents tomorrow, at our Thursday work session, to take up this matter again and to indeed vote, suspend the rules and vote on who our next colleague will be to sit in the seat vacated by Councilmember Reese. Councilmember Johnson, I'll yield to you. Are there any things you need to add to that in terms of housekeeping, or?
No, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think you got it.
Thank you so much. And again, Madam Mayor, colleagues, thank you so much. And again, thank you to each of you for willing to take on run this gauntlet. This is not easy, and it's a special personality type that would step up and subject themselves to this willingly. And we know that it comes out of love for our city and love for our community. So profound thanks on behalf of an entire city. Madam Mayor, that I think, as chair of the Procedures Committee, that ends my responsibilities today, and I'll gladly yield back to you, ma'am.
Thank you all so much, and we will now stand adjourned, and we will resume with our regular business tonight at 7 o'clock. Come back, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.